Please be aware that this meeting is being transcribed only for the purpose of producing the minutes. This transcript will be deleted once the committee approves the minutes. The transcript should not be downloaded by anyone other than Democratic Services. We welcome the use of Welsh language at meetings. I have had no requests for people to speak Welsh today, however, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind members that, as per statutory guidance made under Section 4 of the Local Government (Wales) Measure of 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending a meeting remotely must be able to be seen and to be heard by the members and officers who are attending the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing the meeting. So can I ask that you all please use your cameras for the duration of the meeting. Please can members attending via Microsoft Teams refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. Please remember to keep your microphones muted when you are not talking. So, moving on to the agenda. Agenda item number 1, attendance and apologies. Over to Jade.
Thanks, Chair. I've not received any apologies for this morning.
Thank you very much. Item agenda number 2, declarations of interest.
Thanks, Chair. So, starting with Councillor Haller, please. I have that you're a contributor to the fund.
That's correct.
Thank you. And Councillor Keat, just to confirm there are no interests for yourself.
Correct.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, I have that both yourself and your wife are in receipt of a pension and contributed.
Correct.
Thank you. And then yourself, Chair, I have that your father and 2 other family members are in receipt of a pension and you're a contributor.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item number 3 then is the minutes. These start on, it's the minutes of the meeting on the 15th of December. It seems much closer than that. This is for members of the committee to raise any issues and then to agree the minutes. These start on page 5. Do any members have any items they wish to raise or any issues of clarification? In which case, I'll take it as read that we're happy to sign those minutes off. Excellent. Item number 4. These are the minutes of the Local Pension Board on the 28th of January 2026 for members to raise any issues and to note the minutes. I've got Ian Coleman here as Chair of the Pension Board. Ian, is there anything in particular you'd like us to...
Surprisingly, no comments to make, Chair.
All right then, as ever then, I'll take it as read that members are happy to note the minutes. Excellent. Before moving on to item number 5, I'm going to ask Andrew Lovegrove to come in briefly. As many of you will know, or all of you should know, this is Alex's last meeting as Head of Pensions, and tomorrow is his last day at Torvine before he goes off to work at the new pension company starting on Wednesday. Now, I'm happy to make time available at the end of the meeting should anyone wish to express any sort of sentimental comments about Alex and his time here. But importantly, at the head of the meeting, I'd like Andrew just to talk through the arrangements we've agreed in the medium term to get us through Alex's departure and until we are compliant with the new regulations set out in the forthcoming pensions legislation. So, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you said, Alex's last day is tomorrow, and then he moves across to the investment company. We have appointed a firm of recruitment consultants to start the search for a new head of pensions. There will be adverts going out, and that process will follow its course, and we'll get to a point where we appoint a permanent head of pensions. In the interim, we have an arrangement where the pensions manager, the investment officer, and myself will share the duties that are currently carried out by the head of pensions, so the various statutory and regulatory requirements we need to carry out. So that does mean that from Wednesday, the investment officer may be able to tell Alex in his new role what he wants from the Torvine Fund. So it will be an interesting change in the dynamics. So we will keep the committee posted on the progress of that journey to appoint the new head of pensions. But in the meantime, we've made arrangements to make sure all the services and facilities are covered.
Excellent, that's pretty clear. So, members, any questions off the back of that? David.
Just a question, really. Will the Chair of the Pensions Committee be involved in the interview process, or is that solely a staff issue?
Yes, there will be a number of stakeholder processes through the recruitment process, and there will be formal interview processes. So I'm meeting the consultant this afternoon to firm up a draft timetable and calendar of those processes, which I'll share with the committee once we've got those in a final draft stage.
Yeah, just to follow on from what Andrew said, I think earlier conversations that we've had, it's my expectation to be on the committee on the interview panel for the position, but also I spoke to both Joanne and to Lewis last week. I think what we've agreed for the next couple of months at least is have more regular fixed points in the diary, so we can actually sit down and go over everything in between meetings not with greater regularity than potentially what Alex and I did, because we were talking quite a lot, but actually to have much more strict or formal points in the diary to make sure that we were overcoming any obstacles we might find in his absence. Anybody else? No, in which case, thank you very much for that, Andrew. Moving back onto the agenda, and don't worry, we are going to work him in this meeting, get every last ounce of flesh out of him before he waves off into the sunset tomorrow afternoon. Right, so item number 5, this starts on page 23. This is the pension fund audit plan from Audit Wales. Over to Alex.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. I'm just going to briefly introduce you to this item, and I'll then pass to Zibby, who is online from Audit Wales, who will present some of the detail within the appendix. As will be familiar to all members by now, the pension fund is subject to preparing its own annual report and accounts, and then is, in addition to that, is audited by Audit Wales. What we have in front of you today is a draft audit plan for the 25-26 year, which we are just about to conclude. And essentially what this means is the detail of and the scope of the work that Audit Wales will undertake as part of their review of this financial period, which will commence, or in some cases has already commenced, in readiness for this year-end process. As you know, throughout the next sort of 3 to 6 months, you'll have various updates on the status of the annual report and accounts. The intention is that we will have substantially produced the statement of accounts in the early summer. The annual report will follow, and then there will be a report brought back to the committee later in the year, which will give you a copy of that comprehensive annual report and accounts, together with, we hope at the time, a clean audit opinion, all of which we would need signed off before the statutory deadline of the 1st of December. Obviously, we've got some way to go yet, and I think it's probably now an appropriate time to hand over to Zibby to outline the steps that they will take in that sort of next 6 months, and before you reach the conclusion of this exercise. Zibby, are you okay to make a couple of comments, please?
Yeah, morning everyone. Yeah, I was just going to highlight some of the key areas from the plan. Materiality this year is 44.5 million. This is 1% of the gross assets from last year, which is the same materiality base as we've used in previous years. And then there's a lower materiality of 10k on related party disclosures. In terms of risks this year, the only significant risk is of management override, which is standard across all of the Audit Wales audits. We also mentioned 3 areas of audit focus. 2 of these are the same as last year. One is the valuation of the investment assets. The figure I mentioned in the plan is 4.4 billion from last year's accounts, but we understand this has since increased to 5.1 billion in December 2025. The other is the actuarial valuation of the present value of promised retirement benefits. There's just one new area of audit focus, which is about the need for clear disclosures around the Wales Pension Partnership being developed into an FCA-regulated investment management company. Otherwise, the details in the plan are very similar to last year, and the timing of how we'll complete the work and timeline of that is similar to last year. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has on any of that.
Thank you very much. So, members, in the first instance, if you have any issues you'd like to raise or questions about the draft plan, now's the opportunity. And if you do have any questions, could you please also refer to the page number in the consolidated pack so we know exactly what you're referring to. David.
Yeah, just I don't know if you could just say a fraction more about that last bit about the disclosures. quite what's involved, because obviously this will be the first time for that. So, sorry, page 33. They're talking about...
Yeah. So in terms of the big change in how the assets will be structured happens from the 1st of April. So for this year, it makes relatively small amount of impact on what the work looks like for us. But the big thing is that there's going to be more disclosures in the accounts about what's happening in the process that that you're preparing for 1st of April. So in terms of values, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but it's more just having the disclosures in the accounts. It's an audit risk that we've raised on all of the audits for pension funds this year in Wales.
So as I understand it, it's more about process than anything else, which is helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Zibby. Anybody else? Alex or Andrew, is there anything else you'd like to raise?
Well, just on the point, just been raised about what happens in the new regime when things are very different. There have been conversations with Audit Wales, and we've said, as the 8 funds, can we agree a protocol that applies to all 8 funds rather than trying 8 different times? And they have agreed to do that, so that will be a helpful speeding up of that process.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, if there's no other questions from members, if I can draw people's attention to paragraph 4 on page 23, the recommendation is at 4.1. It is recommended that Pension Committee note the 2025-2026 audit plan produced by Audit Wales. Members, are we happy to agree this? Excellent, thank you very much. That's passed. Zibby, thank you very much for all your hard work again. See you this time next year, if not before.
Thank you. I'll leave the meeting now. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, take care. Right, item number 6 is the administration update that Joanne will be giving. This starts on page 43 of the pack.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide Pension Committee members with an update on the administration services provided by the fund. My Pensions Online, point 4 of your report, you'll be able to see that membership continues to increase. And members continue to enrol on the new My Pensions Online system. So we're really pleased how this is progressing, and we hope to encourage more members to sign up in the forthcoming months. We'll be sending out emails to members within the next month, asking them to register for the new system. So hopefully these numbers will increase. Pension Dashboard. So Pension Dashboard is a government initiative to help individuals access information about their pension online, all in one place. The deadline for the LDPS to connect to the Pension Dashboard was the 31st of October, and the fund successfully connected its data to the dashboard by that date. The fund also has to ensure that its AVCs are also uploaded to the dashboard, and the fund has 3 AVC providers: Clerical Medical, Standard Life and Utmost. Standard Life connected to the pension dashboard on the 31st of October, Clerical Medical on the 30th of November, and Utmost data was submitted to the dashboard in December. So we are fully compliant now with the pension dashboard. And we're just waiting for notification from the pension regulator when this will be made accessible to members of the public. We are working on matching criteria. Information was provided to Pensions Committee a few meetings ago. The Pension Administration Standards Association has released a data matching convention. The original one was released in 2022. And they released a revised version in 2025. We have been waiting for our pension administration system to be upgraded to enable us to use this new matching criteria, and this has now been done. So we're working through the functionality and drafting a matching criteria policy, which we'll bring back to the board and committee at a future date. We have also been asked by Money and Pension Services, MAPS, to help recruit testers for the new dashboard. So we are in the process of writing out to a cohort of members to ask them to register for Pensions Dashboard, and Money and Pension Services will contact them and carry out some work with them to see how easy it is for them to use the dashboard, and that will feed into any improvements in the next iteration. Moving on to point 6, the consultation on access and fairness. In July 2025, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government launched a consultation on changes to the local government pension scheme. And the proposals you can see in point 6.2 of the report. We provided a joint response along with colleagues across Wales to this consultation. The Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government have now published their response to the consultation on the 2nd of February, along with gender pension gap reporting guidance. The Government plans to phase the changes, and Phase 1 is expected to take effect from the 1st of April, and Phase 2 later in the year. Phase 1 will include changes to survivors' benefits and death grants, gender pay gap, gender pensions gap reporting, McLeod remedy and lifetime allowance. We are working with the pension software provider to produce reports to identify the members affected, and then we'll be working closely with the software providers to ensure that the system can deal with these changes retrospectively and going forward. And then finally, McLeod. So work continues on the McLeod project. All pension deceased records have been reviewed and assessed to determine if they have the underpin. And pensioners who have an underpin will be recalculated in April and May, and any additional payments made to them. Our work is also ongoing on transfers in and transfers out to obtain the relevant information from other funds to enable us to correctly assess these members for the underpin. So I invite any questions.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. Members, any questions? I have David in the room, but I'll come online.
Thank you. Yeah, that page 44. So the page you mentioned about the matching criteria, and it's something that the fund needs to decide what data to use for matching members to pension. Can you mentioned as convention. I'm afraid I can't remember 2 meetings back, but can you indicate what sort of things are the kind of indicators? National insurance number, date of birth. You know, it's just to sort of get a little bit of a picture.
Yes, apologies. I probably should have put some more information in there just to highlight what the matching criteria is. Yes, it's ultimately member details, so NI number, date of birth, surnames, forenames, addresses. Those are the main ones. Also, the matching criteria can also take into account previous surnames or previous addresses to try and get as many matches as possible when they're carrying out this exercise.
So that's basically, you know, you've got you're not reliant on 1 or 2 particular indicators. That's really what I was trying to get at. My second question, which is unrelated, was sort of, are you seeing that there's an increase in the take-up on the My Pensions Online after you've done an event? I.e., is there a trigger that is helping you to get the numbers up? Is it worthwhile doing those events?
Yes, we definitely see peaks during the year. Annual benefit statement is the main event that drives the increase. However, when we do go out and do events with members throughout the authority, we do have somebody there from the system team to try and get members to enrol on My Pensions Online. So you probably wouldn't see the increase in the statistics due to the number of members attending the sessions, but there is, you know, we do encourage them at that time as well. And hopefully we will see an increase when we send the email distribution letter out to members in the next month, reminding them about My Pensions Online and asking them to register.
Apologies that they're having a quick conversation there off microphone. You should put your microphone on. Have a go at him as much as I want now in the final meeting. I've got a question actually. Point 7 with McLeod. Are we almost done? Or is it going to be a continuing existential issue that will be coming back to this committee in 5 and 10 and 15 years' time?
This year, we will have carried out the recalculations for all our pensioner and dependent members. Yeah. So that will be done. There are some outlying areas that we need to address, which are covered in regulations, which haven't been passed yet. And the system hasn't been upgraded to accommodate them yet. So we're going to try and do the majority of work over this year. The deadline for completing McLeod is the 31st of August this year. But there may be some areas that do go on further after that for reasons out of our control. But we will keep the committee updated on that.
Very good. The only other comment I've got is a facetious one, and it's that I wish we'd all taken a sweepstake on the pensions dashboard when first elected to this committee 4 years ago, because I'm not sure it's going to go live before the next set of elections next year, although I very much hope it does. Enough of that chat. Right, if, any other questions online? No, in which case, members, if I can draw your attention to paragraph 9 on page 45. The recommendation is at 9.1, and it's the Pension Committee is asked to note the content of the report. We're all happy to note it. Excellent, thank you very much. That's passed. Thank you very much, Joanne. Item number 7. Item number 7 on page 47. This is the funding strategy statement for 2026 and accompanying policies. This report has been written by both Joanne and Alex. It's been submitted by Alex. Are you going to? Who's going? Alex will start, and are you then picking up? Yep. Fine, excellent. Over to Alex.
Thanks, Chair. Members hopefully be very aware of the fact that we are about to conclude another triennial valuation exercise, being the 2025 valuation. Work has been going for 12 months or more now through the various stages of the process, and I'm pleased to present today what I hope is the concluding item or matter in relation to this exercise. So, just as a reminder, we've gone through the process of reviewing the fund's health, if you like, the funding position of the fund as of 31st of March 25. During that process, we've taken advice from our fund actuary, Hymans Robertson, and I should note that Barry Dodds is on the call this morning from Hymans and is happy to field any questions, should there be any. And during that process, we've made recommendations to the committee around things like some of the key assumptions, whether it's prudence or longevity assumptions, and that is sort of up-to-date information as recommended by the actuary, reflecting the work that they do for us. Having gone through that exercise, we've then determined individual employer contribution rates for all of our scheme employers. We've had engagement with them on those proposals, and in some cases some negotiation and discussion around what those rates might look like. And I'm pleased to say we've got to a position today where that position is agreed on all fronts. And then running in parallel, and the kind of primary purpose of this item is to deal with the fund's policies in relation to funding effectively the liabilities and the valuation exercise that we do. And so today we are recommending that you as Pension Committee members approve the funding strategy statement as the statutory policy, but 2 accompanying policies which are sort of related but slightly more granular on a couple of specific areas where the fund has had quite a bit of feedback over recent years. So that's the kind of real high level of what this item involves. If I just make a couple of comments on each of the policies at a very high level. So referring to page 48 of the pack, we've got the funding strategy statement. As I mentioned, that's one of our key statutory policies that the fund has to maintain. We have to sign that off as part of the valuation exercise, as I say, by 31st of March 2026. The focus of the funding strategy is to transparently and publicly outline how we will fund contributions in the long term, with the objective of that being obviously affordable for our employers and stable is the other key objective, and we've talked a lot about stability and long-term, sort of providing as much long-term assurance as possible throughout this exercise. obviously being transparent in the way that we're funding the liabilities. We are dealing with public money, and we're very cognizant of that point. And then also being transparent about the level of prudence that is being used in the calculation and the assumption, because as members will be aware, those decisions do have a direct impact on the contribution rate that comes out of the other end of the process. So we have to be mindful of that when we're setting these assumptions, and all of that was factored into earlier decisions taken. So the funding strategy statement is the comprehensive document. It is in the pack. I didn't propose to go through that in detail as such, but as I say, we've got Barry on the call as well if anybody has any specific questions they wanted to raise. In relation to the two other key policies that we're referring to here, these, as I said, are they're accompanying policies. They're more granular in the sense that they cover areas that the funding strategy deals with, but in a bit more detail. And that is the cessation policy, so it's bottom half of page 48 into page 49, and the contribution policy, and I'll make a couple of comments on each. So the cessation policy, members will recall that the regulations were updated a number of years ago now to reflect the fact that where an employer leaves the scheme, historically, if there was a deficit, whereby the employer at the time, and as calculated by the fund actuary, didn't have enough assets in their pot to meet the liabilities, then the fund would pursue them for that shortfall to make good, so that the cost was not therefore subsidised or fall back on any of the other employers in the scheme. What the regulations didn't allow for at that time was a repayment of any surplus where there may be excess assets over the liabilities. So the employer effectively only had one side of that transaction. So the regulations fairly reflected that and have updated to reflect the fact that now, if there is a surplus, the fund has a level of discretion, but under Regulation 64 is required to consider whether an exit payment or a cessation payment is owed to an employer. So, as you'll be aware, the fund has moved quite significantly from a position of historical deficit into one of surplus. We're not on our own. That's a real trend that we've seen across the whole scheme. And as a result, when employers are now leaving, it's more common to find that they are in surplus, and therefore we have to consider how we will exercise our discretion under Regulation 64. So, in essence, this policy, as a standalone document, is a bit more granular. It outlines the steps that the fund would take in considering whether or not a surplus payment is owed to an employer, and how we would go about dealing with that if and when this situation arises. And that is strictly aligned with Regulation 64. As you're aware, as a committee, we've had a number of employers that have left, a couple of large employers. We have another one that has indicated formally that they will leave at the end of this month. So this policy will be getting used into the new financial year in terms of how we administer those decisions that have been taken. The second policy is perhaps less used, I would say, or I would expect it to be less used by our employers, but effectively it makes provision for circumstances where the fund, at its discretion, may consider a review of employer contribution rates during the triennial valuation cycle. So you'll recall at the moment, the valuation takes place every 3 years. Contribution rates are set at that point in time, and those rates will apply for that 3-year period. In certain circumstances, and there are only a couple of occasions, employers or the fund may make a judgment that a contribution rate review is appropriate. That isn't necessary. So one example where that wouldn't be appropriate is because funding levels have improved and an employer is really well funded, they may come along and say, well, can we have a reduction? That's not in scope of this policy. That's what the 3-year formal review is for. But if an employer's circumstances has changed, for example, they won't exist in the scheme for the full 3 years that have been set, then it may be reasonable to review their rates. So again, that is a fund discretion. It's not a policy we expect to be utilising on a regular basis, but it is there to cover circumstances where an employer may have a legitimate reason for review of its contribution rate within that 3-year period. On page 50, we reference the consultation. As you can imagine, this is a significant policy, and actually the decisions that have been taken over the last 12 months by this committee do have a material impact on our employers, which we understand, so it's appropriate that we consult on some of the key policy developments prior to recommending them to you. Our consultation launched in January. It closed a couple of weeks ago. We've had more engagement in this valuation cycle than I can recall in at least the last two, and perhaps the one before that where I was involved with another authority. So I think it's pleasing that the industry and the scheme is engaging more. I don't know if that's a trend that Barry would attest to, but I think positive. There's lots of conversation and discussion locally. In paragraph 8.3, we at a high level reference some of the key points of feedback that we've received from a number of our employers and their advisors, focusing on a lot of the areas you'd expect, things like the level of prudence that's been adopted. Is it too prudent? What is the justification for some of that? The contribution framework that we have in place, and you'll recall that there's a stability mechanism for the local authorities where we allow plus or minus 1% per annum of rate movements. That's intended to smooth the impact over the long term. I've talked about surplus and repayment of surplus. That has been subject to a lot of scrutiny and discussion. I think healthy discussion on the whole. I mentioned one employer that has formally given notice that they will leave the scheme. Their advisors have been very keen to understand the process that would be followed around dealing with surplus, given that that is something that they expect to materialise in the coming months. And then there's some other conversations and discussions around things such as the post-valuation experience. So activity since 31st of March 25, and questions for Hymans about whether their models still stand up, given lots of things going on in the world at the moment, not least the events in the Middle East. So I'd say lots of positive and I think helpful challenge and scrutiny, but nothing that has prompted the need for us to revise the proposed policies that we have before you. The final point in there was asking around partial cessation. You'll recall this is a bit of a halfway house where the employers are seeking to lock in, sort of using surplus to pay for all the historical liability, and then almost starting afresh with their current future service. This pension committee, as a policy decision, said no to that a number of years ago, and we haven't felt it necessary to open that box again, given that it was a relatively recent discussion and decision that you made. I think I'd probably pause there because the recommendations are on page 51, but very happy to take any questions or comments on any of what I've said or the policies. And as I've said, Barry is online if there are any points that you'd like to ask of Hymans.
Thank you, Alex. You just preempted me slightly. So, Barry, are there any issues particularly you'd like to raise, or any thoughts?
No issues. I would just reiterate, I know Alex referred to a bit more engagement from employers and their advisors at this valuation than we have seen in recent ones. That is typical across the LGPS that we've seen. It's, I think, almost because we're in kind of uncharted territories of surplus at the moment, then there's a lot more engagement than there has been in the past, where it's been a kind of expected result of contributions increasing kind of time after time, that you got a little bit less engagement then, but now that we're in a surplus position, there's a lot more interest and engagement from employers in terms of what kind of reductions they can get as a result.
That seems logical. Thank you very much. Also, as I'm conscious that this item's already been to the board, Ian, any thoughts or issues you want to make us aware of, or any issues that came up from other board members?
Thank you, Chair. No, the comments that were made on the board have been taken into account in this final report that you've got before you.
Jolly good. Okay then, members, anybody have any issues? I'll check online first. Stuart or John, any thoughts? No? Then in the room, David.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of fairly obvious questions, really, I guess. Firstly is, are the cessation policy and contributions policy new documents in their own right, or were they amendments of something that pre-existed? And I can understand you give a very clear rationale for those coming in place. I suppose then the second part of the question, when was that sort of last used, and has there been, if you like, the experience that has then led to the requirement or the change to create something? And I think it's pleasing to note that there has been the engagement with employers, but I guess it's also the last part is the sort of slightly crystal ball bit, which is, are we doing this in expectation that we will get further requests for people to leave the pension scheme? Sorry, it's a bit mixed up, but I think you can get the gist of it.
No, thanks. Really good questions. I should have addressed some of this in my comments. So the policies aren't new to this valuation. We actually introduced them in the 2022 2022 cycle, so they are updates, effectively, evolutions of what were already there. You asked a question about when they were last used. Both of them have been used within the last 12 months. Kind of interlinked, if you like. So the employer that is expressed or was formally given notice to leave the scheme, given that intention, had requested a suspension of their contribution rates for the last financial year. And that was, so in recognition of the fact that they were so well funded and they had given significant assurance that they would leave, the fund was in a position whereby to not consider that request favourably would just result in potentially a bigger repayment of surplus at the end of the eventual process. So we made a decision to use the discretion to exercise the contribution rate review policy, and then obviously we will use the cessation policy to drive or to direct the process post 31st of March when they eventually leave. We've had 2 or 3 employers, I would say, off the top of my head, that have actually left the scheme within the last few years. We've had a couple of high-profile ones, or larger employers within our fund. The policy has been used in all instances to guide that activity. I think part of the consultation and the extensive engagement we've had this year with employers and their advisors has been challenging some of those steps in the process. And I say challenging, I think it's constructive, asking lots of questions about different ways we may deal with things. So the policies you see today reflect a bit of that learning experience, frankly, some of the consultation feedback, some of which we've taken on board, even if we haven't necessarily accommodated what they're asking for. And I would expect in 3 years to be for my successor to be sitting here talking about another iteration of this that reflects more of the experience, because I think we're moving into more of a territory where this will be more dynamic and probably more of this experience going forward.
Thank you, David. Is that okay? Excellent. Okay. I think John and Stuart had already suggested they had no questions, and I'm content with the paper. So if everyone's happy, then I'll draw members' attention to page 51, to paragraph 9. The recommendation is at 9.1. It is recommended that the Pension Committee note the update provided and consider the revised FSS, together with the accompanying policies set out in the appendices, and 2, to approve the policy documents in accordance with the LGPS Regulations 2013 for publication to the Fund's website with effect from the 1st of April 2026. I'll take it that members are happy with that. Excellent, in which case that is done. Item number 8. I'm presenting this, aren't I? Jolly good. So, item number 8. This is consideration of the recent Torfaen County Borough Council petition and other Gwent local authority motions. I don't propose to talk members through the entire report, but I will pick up some of the key points. As we know, there has been increased activity and sort of both public engagement and public interest in the work of the Pensions Committee and the nature of our investments over the last couple of years, in large part due to a mixture of increased levels of activism and interest over climate change, but also, I think, more importantly, activities in the Middle East with the previous conflict between Israel and Palestine, which I think virtually all of us were very happy to have seen an end to a couple of months ago, although that has now been brought into question again, I guess, by the recent activities with the American attacks on Iran. But as we all know, like I said, throughout that period we have had increased engagement from both members of the public, members of the scheme, and members of a variety of campaigning organisations over the nature of some of our investments. Members will remember that on the 20th of January this year, the Council was presented with a petition that called on the Fund to divest from companies linked to illegal occupations, war crimes and crimes against humanity, to disclose all investments and to review its ethical standards, and to ensure pensions are invested responsibly and transparently. Those of us at Council that day, we all agreed to remit that petition to this committee for consideration. Alongside that today, I want to have a general conversation. There are two of our member authorities debated and passed motions last year, those being Monmouthshire and County Council and Newport City Council, where motions were carried and have been sent on to us, which we have discussed briefly in a previous meeting, but I thought it made sense to have a conversation about them all again today. The main issue, or the main backdrop, I guess, that we've been operating against is something that, again, I've discussed here previously, and we definitely discussed last autumn, is that the politicians, the chairs of the JGC, have been pushing for, and finally now we have agreed, the creation of a new exclusions framework at a pool level, which will give us much greater certainty going forward that we've worked out, like I said, a framework for deciding what to do with some of these investments, should they prove to be problematic in the future. We actually met, the last meeting of the WPP was in person in Cardiff on the 10th of March 2026, where we were met with a very friendly demonstration from members of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign and others. And members might be aware that on that date as well, we received emails from the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign asking us to sign up to various of their campaign pledges. At that meeting on the 10th, it was unanimous that this new exclusions framework was passed unanimously, and I'll look to Lewis here. Has that framework, the wording of that framework, actually been shared with members yet? Lewis?
Yes, Chair. So the precise wording is actually captured within Agenda Item 13 of the pack as part of the Wales Pension Partnership update, so members will be able to see the precise policy wording when I present that item.
Thank you very much. So I think basically I just wanted to set out what I expected, or my intention, or at least have a conversation with members today about, I think, what my intentions might be in taking these forward. I think now that we actually have the framework, I think I definitely want to be on the front foot in discussing this framework with the other member authorities and the other employers within the fund, and then also to take that forward to the various campaign organisations that have been in contact with us. I think I would also want to be on the front foot, Joanne, in then communicating the fact that we now have a framework, an exclusions framework, with the wider membership. One thing I am conscious of, however, and this is the nature of campaigns, he says, as a politician who's been involved in many of them in the past, that what we have done, and the agreement that was made in March by unanimously by the WPP, does not meet what are potentially escalated demands of the various campaigning organisations. I'm very happy to have conversations with representatives of those campaign companies that this is very much the beginning of a process, and that the WPP is committed to continuous discussion, although at the same time I am aware that we are passing that over. Some of those discussions will now be held at the company level, so it's easier for us to sort of request the company to have conversations on our behalf, potentially. But obviously, we need to see if this exclusions framework works and to make sure it sticks, I think, over the next couple of years before I'm prepared to start reopening this and to be responding to every campaign request or demand that we receive, regardless of where it comes from. We have a form of words that has been agreed across the WPP. But unfortunately, we've not been able to share that ahead of this meeting because there is still information that we need that is specific to the Grant Fund that we're waiting for colleagues at Hymans Robertson to get back to us with. So what I thought is just basically I'll take the views on members if they're happy for the suggested approach. And the main thrust of it is that once we have all the information at our disposal, that I will write back to member authorities, to scheme employers, to scheme members, but also to the representatives of the campaign companies who are in contact with us, as well as, I think, with all councillors across the 5 authorities, setting out the thrust of WPP policy, that being the exclusions framework that we have agreed, and to talk people through that. But hopefully Lewis and I should hopefully be able to get some wording back by the end of the week that I think if people are happy, I will share next week or as soon as we get it, just so members are aware of what I'm suggesting to send out. So Betty has a hand up, but I will take any thoughts or questions from members first, if that's all right with you, Betty. So I'll look to the screen. John Stewart, any thoughts or suggestions?
I will make a few thoughts and suggestions, but I'll let others go first before I put my 10 pence in, if you don't mind.
Fair enough.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think overall the outline that you've suggested is a sensible one to take forward and keep people aware. I think where a question tends to come a little bit, or most likely to come, is the fact that, and I refer to paragraph 3.5, it's clear, obviously, with the framework that the pensions fund, WPP, successor body, however we've described it, will have a clear remit in terms of what to not invest in. But I suppose DGL is going to be about the process of disinvestment for those that meet that criteria. That's obviously more difficult to be able to give an answer on, but I think there should be something that indicates a willingness to take that route. Does that make sense?
Yes, and thanks for that. I think just it's an opportunity to remind members for the rationale behind setting up the framework in the first instance. I think part of there was growing frustration on behalf of the chairs of the funds that if we wanted to get to a point to divest from any companies until this framework was adopted, we had no facility to agree how to make that divestment happen. So I think, David, that is part of the reason for setting it up. John, any thoughts from you? No. In which case, I'll take Betty, then back to Stuart.
Okay, I just wanted to make everybody aware of something I learned about just last week, and that is Camden Council have just adopted a new RI policy, and I know this is a really moving target, this whole discussion, but their policy, among other things, actually has a conflict zone policy definition, and they define it as a territory or operating environment that is directly or physically affected by armed conflict, including active combat. They basically say the fund recognizes that a company's presence in such regions does not in itself indicate wrongdoing, and the fund does not apply geographic boycotts, and the presence of conflict alone does not imply wrongdoing. The fund's assessment focuses on credible allegations of human rights or international humanitarian law breaches. So I think it basically narrows it down and just said just because you might be, Amazon Web Services and you also serve Israel doesn't mean we're going to have to divest in this. And another thing I personally think is very important, of their ESG priorities, they have added peace, justice, and strong institutions, which is SDG 16. I think given the environment we are already living in, full of hybrid warfare and, questions about taking our security for granted or whether we can or not, I think, we might even consider that going forward. It's in the public domain. I've sent it to Lewis, Alex, Joanne, and also you, Nathan, just for for reference.
Thanks very much for that, Betty. And as we discussed before the meeting started, I actually spoke to Rishi Madliani, who is the chair of the Camden Fund about this last week at the meeting of the Local Government Pension Committee. Obviously, I'm more than happy to take on board the thrust of some of what they've decided, but obviously it's come a bit too late for us to consider that in terms of this framework, although I think it might be quite useful as a rhetorical device, if nothing else, and going back in how we communicate some of this with the various groups I've already outlined. Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I think my concern on this is that pension funds are not used as political weapons. And I think the sole aim of, well, the main aim of the pension is for the best outcome for our members. I very much support transparency where there is direct linking to controversial weapons and such forth, then clearly pension funds should not be involved. But as I said before, our duty should be primary to our members, not to political campaign groups, if that makes clear.
Very much so. And again, I think we all agree that sitting around this table, that the primary function of all the members and everyone else around this table is to ensure that we make a decent and an increasingly better return year on year, so we can pay the pension benefits. And any other consideration is secondary or tertiary to that. I mean, definitely in terms of the specifics here, part of the reason obviously this has been tabled is that we have been approached by, the council has been approached by a specific campaign group via a petition that we are obliged to respond to, but then also because the other member authorities have responded to us. So the principal reason for this item is just to ensure the mechanism while we can communicate that outside of this council chamber. But I think, Stuart, I completely agree with you. David.
Thank you, Chair.
Picking up on my colleague's point there, I think it's very helpful that in fact the guiding principle around that stance and exclusions is about violation of international humanitarian law. So we've actually got something that is, so it's not a sort of a personal sort of, I don't like South Africa or I don't like something, and a lobby, if you like, that is a politically driven one, but it's actually something that is tied to international law decisions that gives you then a framework to actually sort of say that, yes, we in line with other investing bodies should be taking that stance. So I think that's helpful.
No, absolutely. I think for those of us who've been talking about this now for 3 years, if not 4 years, there are a number of campaigns that are calling for country-based and country-specific exclusions. That is beyond our ken. That is not something that we would be arguing for around this table. I think that is something I've been very clear about in my communication with the various organisations in the past. I think that is something we need to get across here. David's got his hand up again, so I'll take that, then we'll move on.
I apologise, because obviously I know that one of the things we considered in our own local responsible investment strategy was around investment as well as divestment. So therefore, I just wonder if there's anything to frame in terms of what we're looking to try and do in terms of what the fund is trying to do in terms of positive investment as well as responding to the political. It may not be appropriate, I'm just asking the question.
That's a very good question, and I think I would refer that to Alex in his new guise in about 2 days' time, because much of the heavy lifting in turning this framework into a reality will now lie with the staff at the company who have to then put these principles into practice. So good luck. I'll take Ethan, then I'll move on.
Yes, I'd just like to echo that about the positive iteration around investments, and usually this is done around the context of a local investment policy or responsible investment policy. The local investment policy will reside with the administering authority. So while WPP will be fundamentally involved in implementing that, it will be our role to devise that. And I think in terms of positive communication strategy, this is in our gift to have that. So I think that's definitely a more engaging way to describe what is done at Torvine. And I think we, as your independent advisors, will be very supportive of how you express that.
I'm very glad to hear it. So thank you very much for that. Moving on then, I see no other hands up. If I can, what page am I on? Page 115. If I can draw members' attention to page 115, the recommendations is paragraph 6 at 6.1. So it's recommended that the Pension Committee discusses the recent Torvine County Borough Council petition and agree its response. So essentially, are members happy for Lewis and I to finish off drafting the response once we have the information from the actuaries? I will share it with members, but then I hope to get this out in the next 2 weeks maximum. People happy with that? Stuart, John? Amazing. Great. Thank you very much. Item number 9, thankfully back to an officer presenting. This is the Wales Pension Partnership Investment Management Company Business Plan. Bit of a mouthful for 2026 and 2027. So I think what I've suggested this time, I'm going to ask Alex to talk us through the report, but maybe when it comes to actually recommending the report, I will ask Andrew to do that, because I think I'm very conscious, and indeed Alex is very conscious. He doesn't want to be setting out a plan on Monday that he then has to put into practice on Wednesday. So, Alex, over to you. This is on page 117.
Thanks, Chair. I think just to start by making the distinction, because I realise and appreciate there's a couple of business plans and budgets on this agenda. So what we're recommending here today is, for this particular item, is the new WPP Investment Management Company's business plan and budget for the 26-27 financial year. Members who attended the meeting back in February recall, as we were agreeing the governance documents, that there are a number of moving parts here, but I think the key points to make are, for the 26-27 financial year, it will very much be a transitional and a formative year for the new company. Hence, there is a 1-year plan and a 1-year budget proposed. Going forward, and per the governance documents that were agreed, the company will establish a 5-year strategic plan and will then have annual budget review points and annual budget approval assigned, which will be linked to that 5-year plan. So this is much more transitional. It's 1 year in its nature. I could talk through the actual appendix itself in a second, but I suppose the key points to highlight are this. The budget for the year for the company is proposed at £9 million. That is £2 million higher than the original budget that the shareholder group, of which Andrew Lovegrove, myself, Nathan have been part of in various forms, put forward to the government when we were seeking its approval to remain as a standalone pool. The reason for that £2 million increase is largely bringing forward resources that the company, with its leadership, with Rob Lamb, the CEO, in place, determined that he needed more of the staff that were perhaps earmarked for year 2 and year 3 in year 1. So he's brought forward some of that recruitment profile, which has naturally increased the projected or proposed cost. The other key aspect, and I think this largely is a reflective of learning as we've been developing the project, is it was initially assumed that the new company might be able to leverage some of the local authority business support functions, be it a finance or a HR support, and in some cases legal support. I think, again, in recognition of the complexity of this new entity, its regulatory nature and the expectations that the FCA would have upon it, it's been determined that the company needs standalone provision for all of those. So the £2 million is broadly, the increase of £2 million is broadly staff, which is around 75–80% of that, and the remaining 20% is those business functions. The company business plan, as I say, 1 year, it's established 8 key objectives. These are quite broad in their nature because obviously it's a new entity, but I would say they are targeted and they're specific around the objectives, both that the shareholders have given it and the government have given it in terms of the fit for the future expectations. This isn't expected to be a one and done in terms of produce this document now and nobody refer back to it. The company will come out to talk to each of the pension fund committees over the next 12 months on a number of occasions and will report back progress that is being made. That might be necessary to adjust budgets or to report on progress around some of those key milestones, for example. And just to reiterate that per the governance documents that were agreed back in February, the business plan and the budget of the new company is a reserved matter, meaning that it requires this pension committee approval before it can be put in place. And so, subject to your approval of this today, the company will then be able to effectively invoice the pension fund for its first quarterly allocation from 1st of April, given that it will invoice quarterly in advance. So I think those are the key points I'd like to make. If we can refer to page... Or should I pause?
I'll just pause there. I think, are members happy with the thrust of what Alex has outlined, or are there any sort of big strategic questions you'd like to ask now before we dive into the detail? John, no. Stuart. David, yes.
Just two quick observations, if I may. Firstly, I think it's very helpful report, very clear, and very, very useful, and the outline of what's there. The second thing is to note that, pertinent to the previous item, I think it's really good to see that responsible investment is one of those objectives put down up front very clearly. And secondly, I would fully support the move to having the body having its own staff for some of those backup functions, because I'm conscious of some of the issues that related with the CJC, where some elements were done through local authority that has led to some difficulties that have been a bit messy, shall we say. So I would endorse that approach. I hope that's helpful, and I've given a rationale as well.
That's very helpful. Thank you, David. Alex, back to you for your deep dive.
It wasn't planned to be a deep dive, but I am happy to kind of field questions that members have.
It's all relative.
From page 121 is the actual business plan itself. Obviously, the executive summary, I won't go through this in detail, but that is outlining the intention and the purpose of the new organisation, with focus very much on this next 12-month transitionary and formative period. Moving through the document, maybe just to make a couple of comments on the strategic objectives themselves, page 125. So you can see up front and centre is that focus on fiduciary duty, fiduciary responsibility. The company inherits that responsibility on behalf of the 8 pension fund authorities, and for the discussion in the prior item, as has been noted by Councillor Williams, responsible investment remains a key objective and a strategic objective 4. There are 1 or 2 areas that very much need work. So I think when we think about investment implementation as number 2, there is a plan in place for that. I think that's one of the more advanced areas for the company from 1st of April. But item 3, for example, investment advice, and item 5, local and Welsh investment, those are areas that will be developed during the year, and I think are 2 good examples of items that you could legitimately ask for progress updates when the company comes to talk to you in the coming months. On page 126, there's a bit of focus on, or there is focus on governance. We talked a lot about this back in February, so I didn't necessarily intend to labour that, but just to note that the 3 key documents that were in scope, you have the inter-authority agreement, which is the existing partnership document, if you like, that binds the 8 authorities. That has been updated to accommodate the 2 new governance documents, and I'm pleased to say has now been approved by all 8 of the pension fund committees, and that is also the same for the shareholder agreement and the client service agreement. So the final stages of plugging the remaining details and the gaps, which is with the lawyers, is taking place now. So the governance has been established and agreed, and will become operational from Wednesday, and I think will be a key aspect of developing this new organisation. On regulatory compliance, another key milestone is the FCA. We haven't yet received that authorisation, but we have had engagement with the FCA as recently as Friday. There are a number of relatively operational questions that are outstanding that are being addressed this week, and we await formal approval from the FCA, or formal authorisation from the FCA, and an update will be provided in due course. And as I mentioned, with regards to the budget team, I think there will be a headcount of 12 from Wednesday, plus 6 board members. That headcount of 12 is expected to double by around Christmas time, so that reflects bringing forward some of those anticipated hires that may originally have been understood to have happened in years 2 and 3. So there will be a team in place to serve each of the authorities as clients, and hopefully that is reassuring. I think the remainder of the document, I would say, is for your information. We've addressed the key headlines from the budget, but page 129 gives a little bit more detail around some of the breakdown of that cost. I think I talked about this in February, but at this stage, the cost is anticipated to be shared equally by 8 authorities. There will be a piece of work, or there is a piece of work ongoing, which will then determine whether it's appropriate for all of that cost to be equally shared, because some of it is activity and consumption-driven, consumption-based. So over time, it may be that it's not a straight 8-way sharing of cost. And so there'll be some communication and engagement back on that at the appropriate time. I think the final point to make is, whilst there's been a lot of work to build the infrastructure and the fundamentals in place for this new company, from an investment standpoint, not a lot will change from 1st of April. All of the mandates that Torfaen has today, the relationships in place, will remain for the foreseeable. It's just the oversight of those arrangements will transition from Wednesday to the new company, and there will be a period of time where officers within this authority will be working very closely with the new company to make sure that all of that is operating as we would expect. I'll pause there, Chair, in case there are any final questions or comments.
I've got some people indicating in the room, but just to set out, this has already been endorsed by the CJC, by the WPP when we met in March, and I think I've very much been leading the charge on this for the last couple of months when it became evident that the company would be requesting more in year 1 than officers had originally outlined in the plans that went to government. I think I very strongly take the view, as actually do all the chairs, that this has to be set up properly. You know, it has to be set up correctly on day 1, and that we are more than happy to lean into that and to put extra investment into this process early to ensure that we actually can have liftoff at an appropriate manner and at an appropriate weight, which I think I'm currently confident will be the case. I think I also speak on behalf of all the chairs, is that we definitely want to make this a success, and that if there is to be further engagement, with the further engagement that will need to take place ahead of next year, that we're also, I think we're happy, we're willing to think expansively about how the funds are fully supportive of the company as it evolves over the next 12 months to get to the point where we have the 5-year plans in place for us to be voting on this time next. This has to be a success. I think for the councils, for the funds, for the members, but also in terms of the company, is I think the aspirations we've set out about this being sort of the most important financial institution based in Wales. We need to make sure that we can live up to that banner. So David, I think, had your hand up, then Betty in the room, then I'll come to the screen.
Yeah, thank you. I echo your points, Chair. I think, we want this to be positive and succeed. In many respects, we have no choice. This was set up for us. We've got to go down this road, and we've got to make it work as effectively as possible. And I'm sure that, if Alex is anything to go by, then the quality officers in the new body will be very good. So I suppose my simple question is, or simple, relatively, you've indicated that there's a cost to the Gwent Fund of 1.25 million. Presumably, we are comfortable with that, and it's not going to mean dipping into council reserves, because that's what other councillors would be wanting to ask of us. So it's covered. Secondly, I guess there's going to be a likelihood that the cost contribution may increase in subsequent years. But I also would expect that as the company gets established, if you like, the savings and the work through on the investment should allow for the funding of the self-funding, if you like, in terms of the fund, and less drawdown on the constituent authorities who are stakeholders. Am I right in those suppositions? Just a quick point on that. Thank you.
Betty.
Sorry. following on from the last comments, I just wanted to make sure everybody notes that on page 129 and also 119, in this table, the delegated implementation and related services, this middle office and administration service and rebalancing activity, especially cash flow management. This is one of the biggest areas to change, and this is for all pools, not just WPP, and it's going to require a really intense near-term focus, and this must be a success, and that goes to your fiduciary duty, the whole admin kind of continuing to run, and this really has to be a priority item. People think it's middle office and kind of boring, but it is the heart of the matter.
Thank you, Betty. Actually, John or Stuart, any points you'd like to raise, then I'll bring it back to Alex and Andrew. No. I think just quickly before Alex sets in with the more formal in-depth response, the answer is yes, David, to your question. That obviously there is no suggestion that any fee being paid for by this fund to the company will be paid for by reserves or from the council. All transactions are 100% between the fund and the company, but then also, as I think the business plan set out, with some of the aspirations, as you said, with this being a very crucial financial institution, there are always the potential for profits, essentially, although it's a not-for-profit company, that profits will be made in the exercise of the duties of the company, and we've been fully on board from day one that if that is the case and there are surpluses or profits made from external activity, that gets flushed back through the system as potential cost benefits to the member funds. But Alex, if you want to say that in a slightly better fashion.
No, I think all I would add to what you've said is that part of the intention of a 5-year strategic plan is that the company will be able to articulate its plan and its resource, and therefore what its budget requirements may be, so you can kind of plot that future investment. And I think that's important to give the authorities, obviously, to buy in to support that as shareholders, but then, with the client demand as well. So hopefully that will come through in the next plan. And I think your other question was around offsetting savings, and I think when pooling was established, that was the whole purpose, was that more economies of scale would generate efficiencies. I think that has been the case, perhaps not to the extent that people might have imagined. The challenge now for the new company is to go and flush out some more efficiency, and I would say quite confidently today there is efficiency to be generated. There will be bigger winners, I think, depending on the circumstances of the other authorities, but I would expect over time some compensating savings against this significant investment that the fund is making.
If nobody has any more thoughts or questions, I'm going to pass over to Andrew just to to finish off this item, and then we'll ask him to formally move the report, or formally recommend the report.
Thank you, Chair. As we've discussed, and this is an important part of getting the investment company up and running, this is the budget that puts it in place. We will keep this under review. There's various moving parts within this process, and a lot of this we will not know the details. We've actually got the company up and running, so we'll keep a very close watching brief on the arrangements. For completeness, I am at the moment still a director of this investment company before it trades, but I will cease to be a director when it's up and running and regulated by the FCA. We have a board meeting this evening just to finalise some last-minute policy changes, so hopefully we'll have responded to all of the FCA questions and queries. So in theory, I think we should be to go later on this week.
Actually, just something else. Thank you very much, Andrew. And just something else I was going to pick up. Part of the reason, or the main reason why there has been a delay to the FCA accreditation has got nothing to do with any of the inputs coming from the company. As the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed, the legislation hasn't yet been agreed in Westminster, and indeed because of the potential standoff that is about to occur between the Lords and the Commons, between the reserved mandation powers provisions in the bill that the government is pushing. I doubt we'll get this signed off until the first week of May, before the new session of Parliament is established with the King's Speech in the second week of May. So I think my understanding is that everything is on track, but the FCA will not be giving us the full accreditation until the legislation is finally passed, and therefore everything is 100% legal, which is, let's be perfectly honest, is not a bad stance for the FCA to take. In which case, then, I'll take it as read then that Andrew is happy to recommend that we pass this. So I draw members' attention to paragraph 6 on page 120 of the combined pack. The recommendation is at 6.1. It is recommended that the Pension Committee approve the 2026-2027 Wales Pension Partnership Investment Management Company's Transitionary Business Plan and corresponding budget. Members, are you happy? I'm not reading it out again. Members, are you happy to support this? Yeah, Stuart? Yeah, fine. That's everything. So, well done. Thank you, everyone. Item number 10 on page 141 is the Greater Gwent Torfaen Pension Fund Budget for 2026-2027. This report has been prepared by Fiona Phillips, Pension Fund Accountant. So nice to see you online, Fiona. By Lisa Pearce, who's on leave, she would be there otherwise, and by Alex. This has been submitted by Alex, and presumably you're going to talk us through it.
Thanks, Chair. So, yes, another budget report, and it's pleasing that members approved the last item because contained within the annual budget for 26-27 includes the company resource that we've just signed off. So, this is a budget report that we bring to this committee at this time every year, seeking your approval for the proposed resource required to run the pension fund service for the next 12 months. Although, as ever in this instance, the investment management aspect kind of dwarfs the budget, it's important to state that the resources that we are seeking your approval for here cover the full extent of the service, including obviously all of the staff costs involved in administering the whole service, but also the software, the systems, the oversight and governance arrangements, so a lot of our external advisory costs, etc. So it's a comprehensive document. It captures everything. Pages 141 and 142 are background information that are there really just to reiterate the steps that we take. I should note to the comment or the question in the prior item, the pension fund's budget is completely separate to that of the authority. There is no reliance on the council's revenue account to support the pension fund activity, and it's run within its own arrangements. On the top of page 143, we outline a number of key assumptions, as is the case with most budgets, and your forecasting, it's never certain, so you have to use a best estimate. Within section 5, we highlight a number of assumptions that haven't really changed a lot in terms of the approach we take, but some of the detail has. So, for example, we've assumed that there's no changes to our strategic asset allocation for the 12 months ahead. In reality, we know there is an investment strategy review that is due midway through. Whether that materially moves the SAA is yet to be determined, but I wouldn't expect it to have a significant impact. When we think about why do we use the existing SAA, it's largely to project what we expect to pay in investment management fees, which is significant, and the nature of some of those mandates specifically and the fees that are charged on them, such as our private markets. So that's an important assumption to make, but is, in some instances, relatively simplistic if you don't assume any change. We've also assumed that our membership levels, so the number of members actively participating in the scheme or even pensioners, will remain unchanged for 26-27. Again, that's likely to evolve throughout the year, and we will learn by that experience. We have updated all of our membership, our kind of key member assumptions or key assumptions around the actuarial evaluation, things like longevity and mortality expectations, but also discount rate around future investment expectations. So those are updated to reflect relatively new factors. And we do also use, in some cases, around our membership experience, which is particularly difficult to forecast given that it's not within our control. We tend to use prior year trend to make a best estimate of what might happen in the year ahead. So Section 5 really details all of that. Section 6 on page 144, we talk about the pension fund's cash investment strategy. I'll talk about this a little bit more in detail, but it's important to note this year that cash management is as important and is going to become more important than ever for a number of reasons. the fund is moving to a projected cash flow negative position, i.e. we will pay out more during the year than we will generate in terms of our contribution income. That's not uncommon for the LGPS, but it is new territory for this fund. We do have a comprehensive cash management strategy in place, and we also have a liquid portfolio, or a substantial liquid portfolio, that means we can access cash at relatively short notice as and when, albeit that's not always desirable when markets are unpredictable or in periods of uncertainty such as at the moment. I suppose the key points to make maybe is with reference to the table at the bottom of page 145. So I'll take this in two stages. The first will be to talk about the 25-26, the current financial year, both in terms of what we originally proposed and what is essentially our outturn position, and then I'll make some comments on the proposal for 26-27. So what you have here, and I'm referring to the column third in from the right-hand side, so the 25-26 original estimated. That's the budget that we recommended to Pension Committee for approval this time last year. You can see that at the total level there was an income projected of £266 million with an expenditure of £222 million, and therefore a net inflow of £44.3 million. The middle column, so the second column in from the right-hand side, is the updated position to the end of March. So it's effectively our outturn now. I think the key point to note here is the big numbers. So you've got on the income, you've got the employee and employer contribution. As hopefully you're aware, employee contributions are set by central government. We have no control over the thresholds and the percentages that individuals pay. Employers are within our gift, and as we know, we've just set contributions for the next 3 years. That is something that we can forecast relatively accurately, and as you can see, we were only just about £1 million out, and actually there's £1 million more that we've generated in income in the year than we'd anticipated, so that's a positive move. Likewise, on the pension payments, which is the first line item on the expenditure, you can see that we predicted a £93 million payroll for the year, and this is to pay our pensioners. That actually came through at £96.8 million, so it's slightly more than anticipated, but broadly in line with where we were expecting to be. And again, reasons for some of that discrepancy could just be more people moved into pension than anticipated during the year. The CPI that's linked to the pension benefits may have been slightly higher than we forecast, etc. So there are some assumptions there that maybe were just playing out. There are a couple of other items that I would just address from the current financial year, just to kind of emphasise why budgeting is not always straightforward. You can see in the income that we had, there's the third line down, so extra income from employers relating to early retirements and employees. There's a 1.9 million expectation. It actually came in at 4.6, so that's positive. We had more income than we anticipated, but I think the point I'm trying to make here is membership activity is very difficult to forecast. These are costs and income that is driven by events outside of our direct control. The final point I would make on the current financial year is around management expenses, which is the final line under expenditure. You see, we'd anticipated 18.6 million that we would be paying to manage at the time, around 4.5 billion of assets. That's come out at about 21.1 million. That's largely the two factors driving that. One is that the fund's investment performance has been much greater than we'd assumed, so that's a positive thing. The value of the assets have gone up much faster than we anticipated, and therefore the cost that is commensurate with that is something that we can bear. But within that, there are some one-off costs relating to our private markets portfolio. We've talked a lot about that in the past, that fees are not charged in the same way as they are on liquid assets. And also, given the nature and the timing of some of those investments, it's sometimes that you have transactions that come through that are particularly large or maybe unexpected in terms of they don't fit within a standard quarterly cycle that we would see elsewhere. So, but I think I would emphasise, and you can see with the forecast for 26-27, that management fees are going up. which I think, as long as the value of the assets are also growing and ahead of our return expectations, I think we can live with that. But it's one just to monitor into the future. The key point to note was that in both the original forecast and the outturn for 25-26, the fund was sort of 46 million in surplus. So that's 46 million more income than expenditure in that year. For the year ahead, so that I'm now referring to 26-27 in terms of what the budget is proposed. You can see, just going back to the big line items, so for the top line is now 171 million, so it's down around 11 million pounds on what we'd forecast as income last year. That is almost entirely due to us agreeing new contribution rates for our employers, of which all of them have seen rate reductions, all bar a few for some niche reasons. So there's a financial impact to the fund in agreeing those rate reductions, despite the fact that they can be well supported for all the reasons discussed. Also within, but I suppose correspondingly, you can see from the pension payments at 99 million that the cost of paying pensioners is not going down. So there is a shortfall of 10 million there that we need to plug. We also have mentioned in the report, and I've referred to this today, that we expect an employer, they've formally given notice to leave the scheme at the end of March. That cost is likely to be borne in the new financial year, and we've made a provision for 22 million, if you like, in repayment of that surplus. So we've assumed that that will be paid, and therefore we will recover that money from our portfolio because we don't have that cash on hand. So there is a corresponding inflow to meet that expenditure at the time. And I think I've already made a comment on the management expenses, but you can see that we've projected further increases to 23.3 million for the year ahead. What that means at the bottom line is we're, rather than showing a 46 million net inflow to the scheme, we're now showing a 36 million outflow on paper, or a notional outflow, I should say. This is slightly misleading in that where we have income from our investments, and that's in the bottom line of the income section, that income is always reinvested anyway, so we don't actually see that cash, but it's there if we need it. That hasn't changed in terms of we can still access that cash. It's just a case of turning that on, if you like, literally speaking to one of the investment managers and asking them to pay out the income, the dividend income, rather than automatically reinvest. Just structurally within one of the big mandates that the fund has this year, the manager has defaulted to a position of accumulation, so we're having to report that shortfall. So that, coupled with lower employer contribution income, just means we have a notional deficit, but we will make good on that through both our cash management strategy and the liquid portfolio. So I hope that's made sense, but I may pause there because I think that's the crux of this item. But are there any questions that anybody has?
Thank you very much, Alex. Stuart.
Well, thank you very much for that comprehensive report. I just want to clarify a few things, see if I got this right in my own head. The pensions themselves, they're inflation linked, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yes. Is there a cap on this at all? So the reason I'm saying, so is there a cap? Sorry, is there a cap? So if, say, for instance, the inflation goes, I don't know, 10%, does that mean the pension gets an extra 10%?
Yes. So it's an uncapped CPI liability, and they
right.
use September CPI. Thank you.
I thought that's what I heard. Right. So clearly, right, given the current economic uncertainties at the moment, right, this could have a major impact on the pension fund, depending on how inflation goes in the next 12 months. But would that assumption would be right?
Yes, and I think we've recent experience with Russia and subsequently with the Israel-Palestine wars that we've seen where there's been inflationary spikes. We have seen that come through. I can recall in the last 2 or 3 years a 10.1% increase, inflationary increase on both the pension liabilities, so pensioners in receipt of payment, but also on the accrual for members that are building up pensions. So it's been borne in both sides of that liability.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense because clearly it looks like that inflation and interest rates are only going one way at the moment. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Stuart. Any other comments? I think it's been quite clear thus far. Happy for Alex to continue? Yeah, okay. Back to you.
Thanks. So I think that's probably the gist of what I wanted to cover, really. On page 149, there is another table, a more simplistic table, which is what we have to report in the annual report and accounts. Under the SIP for guidance, there's 3 categories. So you've got your administrative expenses, investment management expenses, oversight and governance. And that basically subtotals the detail that I just talked through in the more granular table. So I think the headline message is that the proposed budget for the 26-27 financial year is £23.2 million, of which 95% of that is in relation to the investment assets on a £5.4 billion scheme. I'm happy to take any final questions, Chair, but I think that's all I wanted to cover.
Okay, thank you for that, Alex. I've got David in the room.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that breakdown at 8.2. So, obviously, it seems quite a significant increase in terms of the investment management expenses from 14.6 billion to 18.1. Is this an area that the new body will be able to perhaps look at driving down some savings or rationalisation in terms of the investment? That's the first question. And the second one was, I'm still trying to get my head slightly around a bit about the Waystone thing, because I don't deal with this kind of thing on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. So I guess it's really trying to understand, is that a one-off which will then lead to more equalisation, if you like, in terms of the forward projections after this next year, or is it something that is going to continually show itself in the balance sheet?
Yeah, I was very conscious of the presentation of this in terms of the investment management fee going up, because, as I say, one of the primary objectives of pooling was to see fees come down. I think we're kind of caught somewhere in between here, because one of the things that is driving a lot of the cost on investment management is our private markets portfolio. They are significantly more expensive to invest in than traditional listed assets, of which sort of 60% or 70% of the portfolio is invested in. And there is that equalisation point you make, whereby you can be a beneficiary of equalisation, but quite often if you're investing at a later stage in a product, you are benefiting immediately from the sort of hopefully positive investment returns that have been developed in the time that others have invested, and you are rightly compensating those investors. So there is a cost to entering, and we had one that we'd committed to that had a £1 million one-off equalisation just before, in this month. So there's £1 million that is born in 1 month that wasn't necessarily anticipated. I think your question around what the investment management, the new WPP investment management company's role is here. Yeah, yes, I think the objective is to try and drive some more efficiency here. There's the whole piece around real estate, the new portfolio there, we would hope to see some efficiencies coming through soon, because that arrangement is up and running. I think now that the new company will have discretion over all assets for all 8 funds, there will definitely be more efficiencies to be made, and there'll have to be lots of conversations about how we develop that. So I think you will see some efficiencies on a lot of the listed assets, but that is where I would say fees are pretty competitive already. I think there's still room for more. Where we're going to continue to incur cost is private markets, and I think that's got some room to run, frankly, as it matures, before maybe that we then look at sort of future more scalable solutions where perhaps we can bring some of those costs back in. So I think on the cost side, we'll probably see further increases for a period of time, but hopefully compensating investment returns that are growing faster than we'd anticipate.
Thank you, David. I mean, John, any thoughts, questions your end? No, Stuart's turned his camera off, so Betty.
Yeah, I would just remind people that the ending investment value at the end of 2024 was around $4.5 billion, and now it's over $5 billion. So it's about a 10% increase. So part of that is volume driven, and as Alex has just mentioned, part of that is also shifting into more, private markets, which are higher. But there was a very steep increase in the size of the portfolio.
Absolutely, that's the point I was going to make. There will be. Let's be honest. We want to be bigger. We want to be carry more weight, but there will be a corollary there that the fees will increase to reflect upon that. But all in all, I think.
And just to sort of say, Chair, I recognise that we've made that investment decision to change that balance to actually go in that direction. So, as a consequence of that, that's the fee increase that you've outlined, Alex. So I don't disagree with the budget at all, by the way.
And forgive me, I wasn't suggesting that I thought you would disagree. Yeah, this is a friendly, loving environment. But just to say again, without overblowing it, I think actually, and this is the last sort of budget you'll push through. I think if you look back to the state of the budget for this fund 6 years ago when you started, and then even 4 years ago when you took over as at the head, we've seen really sort of solid, fantastic progress over that period. And as much as that you are not the god of the markets who can ensure that things have gone up at the rate we would want them to do, I think you can take some, you can take a degree of pleasure in the decent state that you're leaving the fund and the budget for the next period. So, good work. With that then, I'll draw members' attention to paragraph 10 on page 153. The recommendation is that members of the Pension Committee note the contents of this report and approve the pension fund budget for 26-27. Everyone's in favour of that, I presume. Amazing. Thank you very much. That is carried. Item number 11 then is on page 157. This is the Greater Gwent Pension Fund Business Plan for 2026-29. It's been prepared by Alex, by Joanne and by Lewis, and the report has been submitted by Alex. Are you moving it? Or is Lewis doing it?
I'll present this one.
Lewis will present this one. Well, here we go then. Lewis, over to you.
Thank you very much. So the purpose of this report is to present the Fund's 2026 to 2029 business plan for formal approval. As set out in the cover report, it's considered good practice within the LGPS for funds to maintain a detailed business plan that clearly articulates priorities, resources, and how fund performance across all domains will be monitored. Once approved, the plan will provide the framework against which progress and performance will be reported back to the committee. I won't spend too much time on the cover report, so if you can now turn your attention to the business plan itself, which begins on page 159 of your packs. In the interest of time, I won't talk you through every page in detail, but will instead draw out the most pertinent areas for your consideration. Just before I take you through the business plan, I'd like to point out that we utilise the services of an external design company to help professionalise this year's plan. So I welcome any comments you may have on the design of the document alongside the key contents. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the officers sat here today and the entire pension section team for their collective contributions to this year's business plan. As a team, I think we recognise the importance of close collaboration and the positive impact this has on ensuring the fund's long-term objectives are fulfilled. So, if we jump firstly to page 3 of the business plan, or page 161 of your packs, this slide essentially provides a high-level overview of the fund, including some factual, quantitative information, and outlines the overarching purpose of the business plan, which is essentially to outline a roadmap to achieve the fund's long-term objectives. I should point out that I've since received a revised version of the business plan after the cut-off date for Pension Committee report submission that does include Councillor Youl's title as Chair of the Pension Committee. So rest assured, Chair, that your title will be included in the version that is subsequently published. The next page, or page 4 of the business plan, then highlights some of the fund's key statistics. This includes the total membership and employer base, fund assets under management, the fund's funding level according to the most recent valuation as of March 2025, and the budget for the year ahead, which was presented in detail during the previous item by Alex. Despite the fact that the fund will be in a negative cash flow position next year, we still thought that it was appropriate to highlight the fund's budget as one of the key stats on this page, purely in the interests of transparency. Page 5, which I appreciate is rather text-heavy, talks through in a little more detail some of the most noteworthy updates or milestones achieved during the previous year pertaining to various different domains. Key developments such as the introduction of a new data cleansing module, the evolution of the fund's existing risk management approach, completion of the 2025 triennial valuation exercise and the resulting significant improvements to the fund's funding level, and the introduction of a new My Pensions Online system are all captured here on this slide. If we skip ahead now to page 8, this is on page 166 of your packs. This slide sets out the fund's 3 core strategic objectives of being accessible and informed, compliant, efficient and effective, and ensuring that the scheme is sustainable for the long term, both in terms of affordability for fund employers, but also through an investment lens in terms of maintaining exposure to investments with recognition of climate-related risks and opportunities. These core objectives were collectively discussed and agreed by the entire pension section a couple of years back, and essentially broadly sum up what the fund strives to achieve over the long term through its core operations. The next page, or page 9, then lists some examples of the most pertinent tasks for the year that correspond with each of those strategic objectives I just mentioned, purely to provide a flavour of how more specific tasks contribute to the fund's broader long-term goals. The examples mentioned on this slide include developing a more sophisticated cash management strategy in light of our negative cash flow projection, establishing a social media presence, and considering and abiding by the new government legislation that is expected to be introduced in light of the Fit for the Future reforms, both in terms of asset pooling and the governance-related reforms that are expected. A more comprehensive list of tasks pertaining to each strategic priority is outlined further on in the document, which I will come to shortly. If we move next on to page 11 of the business plan, and this is on page 169 of your pack, this is a chart you may be familiar with that depicts the fund's governance structure as of today. I wanted to highlight that this chart will certainly need to be revised at some stage during this year due to the forthcoming official launch of the new WPP Investment Management Company, and this is reflected within the footnote under the diagram. It's also likely that this chart will be amended in conjunction with a broader review of the fund's governance policy documentation, where other areas born out of the expected legislative changes will also need to be considered, such as the need for the committee to appoint an independent person, the requirement of becoming subject to triennial independent governance reviews, and the requirement to appoint a statutory senior LGPS officer. If we jump next to pages 14 and 15 of the business plan, or pages 172 and 173 of your pack, these slides present the fund's change activities. Change activities are essentially the key annual deliverables of the fund that do not necessarily form part of our typical business-as-usual activities or operations. These activities span across multiple domains, each of which is linked to at least one of the fund's core strategic objectives that I mentioned previously, and these have been colour-coded to correspond with previous slides for ease of reference. Again, I didn't plan on taking you through each individual deliverable here in the interests of time, although I would like to mention that during the process of identifying this year's key change activities, we accounted for tasks that were either not completed or still in progress at year-end from last year's business plan, and we've ensured that such tasks are reflected in this year's checklist. Examples of this include various policy reviews and RI or responsible investment related objectives, which will be considered a high priority for the year ahead. David?
If I may, Chair, it was just on that page 172, you mentioned outsourcing mail, so I was, that's part of your comms approach. Could you just confirm what that is? Thanks.
Joe, would you like to? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Some departments within the council and other organisations outsource mail by sending post that we normally post out to members individually to a company, and they send it out on our behalf. So that's what we're looking at introducing with the fund. That will ensure that members can get mail every single day posted to them, so we can be more reactive. And hopefully, and it will save time for members who are currently going in to do the post, so it will free up their time to concentrate on more work that they can carry out during the work that they do.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Joe. Moving on then, I'd like to talk you through the slides pertaining to the high-level pension fund and operational budget on page 175 and 176 of your packs, respectively. As mentioned earlier, we feel that including the budget within the business plan is appropriate in terms of the interests of public transparency. Given that you've just been presented with a very detailed report focused on the budget, I certainly didn't plan on taking you through these pages in any great detail. But I did want to point out that we've provided a footnote at the bottom of page 17 to essentially alleviate any potential concerns at the initial sight of the negative net income figure for the year ahead, which, without context, could be quite alarming or could perhaps be viewed in a negative light. The 3 pages that follow this cover areas that members may be familiar with from prior versions of the business plan, and this is in respect of the 2026 training programme, how we monitor progress against the plan's objectives, and further information regarding some of the fund's full suite of policy documents. Again, I won't go into any further detail here, but these pages are there for your perusal. Lastly, I just wanted to briefly mention that we've added a glossary of terms to this year's business plan, which can be found on the final page or page 180 of your pack. And this is purely to expand on some of the frequently used acronyms throughout and to provide more information or context about some of the most important terms referenced throughout. Finally, I'll pause there to allow for any questions on any of the pages I've covered in a bit more detail, or perhaps pages that I didn't really touch on. Thanks very much.
That's very kind of you, Lewis. Thank you very much. Members, or indeed Betty, Ethan, or Ian, for that matter, any questions, comments, thoughts about the business plan? Betty.
Yes, first of all, very good and very nicely presented, in my opinion, Lewis. I just wanted to make a comment on page 173, the WPP-IMCO oversight, and it's included in your governance costs, of course, and it's established internal governance panel to effectively oversee IMCO. I think it is implicit, but it might be made explicit. This is not in isolation. This is collectively with other partner funds and clients. And how this actually comes to operate and be and have teeth, I think, will be the subject of a lot of work and effort, and probably external support as well. But that's going to be a major piece of work.
Thank you, Betty. Anybody else? I think it's David.
Yeah, no, just to echo that, I think it's a very clear report, very helpful, it helpfully laid out. I presume this then goes into the public domain once it's something that's been approved. I think it's helpful to have the glossary of terms, and I would suggest that that probably may be added to as we experience our work through the year ahead.
Betty.
Sorry, one more thing, which is also very helpfully and transparently presented on page 175. I mean, it is pretty stark, the change in the swing in cash, and we understand the reasons. No automatic distribution from a number of the investments, et cetera, but it's a swing of £82 million, of which only less than half relates to the distributions. It's 0.7% of the portfolio. So I just would say this lays out why figuring out how we're going to get the cash on a regular basis as needed in a orderly working fashion will be one of the most important tenets of the SAA, in addition to all these asset categories. It's basically, I always keep the plumbing, like making sure the plumbing, electrics in the house actually work and are joined up, but that just shows you exactly why this is so important.
Completely. Thank you very much for that. Just to say, again, I think it's very clearly presented, and I think it was definitely the right call going to an outside firm for the report. I'm glad you noticed that you missed my title out, but so thank you for ever appealing to the vanity of the politicians. You need to sign off a report. You came to that first. For everyone's benefit, I was very much a late addition. Alex was there was a nice photo of Alex on this report, but I did raise the question, what was the point of having him if by the time it came out he'd already left, so we plonked me in instead. So as long as no one's going to complain about that. I'll draw members' attention to the recommendation, which is paragraph 5 on page 158. and that members of the Pension Committee are recommended to approve the Pension Fund business plan for 26 to 29. Everyone happy with that? Yep. Lovely. Looking forward to seeing that out in the public. I do have one comment, though, which I've raised many times over the years. We do need to have a conversation about the aberrant use of capitals in reports like this, because they seem to crop up far too frequently and in the wrong place. There we go. I'll put my green pen down and move back to being a strategic overseer of this committee with item number 12. This is the quarterly investment performance report for quarter 5 of 2025. This report has been written by Lewis, by Lisa and by Betty. It's been submitted by Alex. I've now got to the point of the meeting today. I have no idea who's presenting anything. So Lewis is smirking, so I presume that means that he's the person who's presenting, kicking off the report. So Lewis, I'll hand over to you before inevitably handing over to Aoife to fill in her section.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this item, which you'll be familiar with, focuses on the Quarter 4 or Q4 Fund Investment Performance Report, covering the period from the 1st of October 2025 to the 31st of December 2025. Typically, I like to take you through this report in quite a fair amount of detail, but I think in the interest of time, I think I'll just cover off the kind of executive summary or key messages of this report, and then pass on to Aoife, who will go through her sort of macro report in more detail, which captures briefly what occurred in Q4 2025, but also provides some valuable insight into what has happened in the first quarter of 2026. So if I touch on the executive summary, and also if anyone has any questions about kind of the key content throughout the report, not necessarily included just in the executive summary, then please give me a shout and I'll endeavour to answer that. So in terms of overall fund performance in quarter 4, the fund delivered a positive return of 3.45%, which outperformed the benchmark return by just shy of 40 basis points, or 0.4%, which was very pleasing. This means that in monetary terms, the fund's value grew by just over £170 million, taking their total value to over £5.1 billion as at the end of December 2025. Over the last 12 months, the fund has returned just shy of 14%, which, despite slightly lagging the benchmark, capped off a very strong year, marginally outperforming the benchmark, and this capped off a very strong year in absolute return terms, more than doubling the long-term annualised expected return assumption of 6% set by the fund's actuary. Similarly to last quarter, the solid Q4 performance was, as is typically the case, largely driven by fund equities, but was supported by modest positive performance across all other asset class exposures. I would note that it's still relatively early to provide meaningful performance data for most of the fund's private market investments, although this is covered in section 8 of the report, if you wanted to receive more information on how we do try to monitor private market performance. In terms of asset allocation, as at the end of December 2025, the fund remained overweight to equities and listed fixed income, and underweight to all other top-level asset classes, including real estate, infrastructure, private credit, and multi-asset relative to the strategic target weights. This is depicted by the pie charts within section 3.3 of the cover report, just to provide a visual of where we currently are versus where we'd ideally like to be over the long term. And this is something that we would expect the new investment management company to facilitate on our behalf. The gap between current and strategic allocations for each asset class continues to reduce quarter by quarter, albeit at a rather steady pace, as capital is gradually deployed into various private market investments. Whilst we do expect to remain underweight to real assets over the short term, we are pleased with the progress that has been made to bridge this gap to date. Currently just over 75%, or 3/4 of the fund's portfolio, is currently pooled within the Wales Pension Partnership. This figure is expected to rise to close to 100% once the new investment management company is operational, whereby IMCO will have full autonomy over implementing the fund's investment strategy and, in turn, hopefully realising the fund's long-term strategic asset allocation. If we move next briefly on to private market commitments. So, as of December 2025, the fund is now committed just shy of £1.2 billion, or around 22% of the fund's total assets under management, to private market investments. These cover predominantly infrastructure, private credit and forestry. Of that amount, approximately 570 million, or just shy of 50% of the total commitment of 1.2 billion, has been deployed so far, 15 million of which was deployed during Q4. Next, looking at the Q1 26 quarters date performance update. So, as of the 28th of February 2026, the fund's value increased by an additional £225 million. I should preface, and I presume Ethan will cover this in a bit more detail, that markets in March have been turbulent, to say the least, amid the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. I don't yet have the kind of Q1, the end of Q1 figures to hand at the moment, but I think it would be prudent to assume a noticeable decrease in the gains, or perhaps a total reversal of the gains witnessed in February, based on the figures that are currently available. And lastly, within the executive summary, I just wanted to touch on long-term performance. So, the fund has produced a 3-year annualised return of around 12.3%, a 5-year annualised return of 8.2%, a 10-year annualised return of 8.9%, and an inception-to-date return of 6.7%. So each of these performance metrics remain comfortably ahead of the benchmark, bar the 3-year period, and well above the newly established actuarial discount rate of 6%, which is encouraging for the fund's funding position and, therefore, long-term sustainability. I'll pause there to allow for any questions before passing on to Ethan to deliver the macro report.
Thank you, Lewis. Any questions? No, in which case, you're stood down. Ethan, over to you for the macro report.
Great, thank you. Well, yes, unfortunately, even having a cut-off as of the end of February was insufficient to capture the recent market volatility. As I know in what you've just been looking through, there was both a December cut-off as well as a February cut-off. So suffice to say, we are operating in quite troubled and uncharted times as far as market performance goes. Based on Lewis's request, I'll quickly address the market to the end of the quarter, Q4, and then discuss what we have seen in the first quarter and how we can expect it to impact the portfolio. So obviously, with a portfolio with over 70% equities, as in your case, there is likely to be an enhanced effect of the prevailing equity market volatility. But that's why in this discussion, I want to trace some of the causes of that volatility so that we can anticipate how it is likely to develop based on some of the backdrop of geopolitical circumstance. So I'll quickly go into the report, and I'll be happy to be stopped at any stage if there's any question. But basically, let's just quickly talk about the year to date that we, as of the fourth quarter. So that was really the theme. There was ongoing economic resilience and an economy that seemed to be somewhat immune from geopolitical developments. We said in the previous report that it had been a staggering year for all the R's. Risk assets had performed well, and resets had been already contemplated on the geopolitical arena, as well as in corporate life, as we looked at the impact of AI and how that was likely to be affecting the general way that corporations are run, how many people they employ, and how well they adapt to technological change. We spoke about realignments, and particularly around global trade, and that had most of it been precipitated by President Trump's upending of the world order in that respect. And we also spoke about reality checks, and this gets around the K-shaped economy, how a certain number of members of the consumer class had really not been participating in the economic strength, and equally the reality check around growing government debt. And that's very important for the recent movements in bonds, because that this growing government debt on the part of developed nations was starting to erode confidence in markets. So there was a lot going on, suffice to say, in 2025, but resilience of economies was really the name of the game, as well as falling inflation and a sense that the central banks around the world had executed a soft landing. That's not to say that all of these factors were not prevailing at the backdrop. So as we then came into the end of the year, we had a strong economy in terms of at least in terms of equity market performance. And as you've seen, your portfolio would have performed very well. The year kicked off immediately with a series of geopolitical ruptures, most of it instigated by President Trump. In the case of we had Venezuela, we had Davos and discussion around Greenland, and now more recently we've had the incursion into Iran. And not yet ground troops, but certainly that is the chatter that we're seeing about overnight, well, whether the conflict will be escalated significantly. So this has really upended the pattern of the performance in the economy. What we were already seeing was so-called safety assets. And when we use the word safety asset, we speak about things like gold or government bonds, because these are supposed to be areas that will perform as a hedge or provide some resilience when there is a development in traditional assets, which would be, say, more negative. And in the case of, say, the famous Liberation Day tariffs, there was more behavior of the safety assets. We saw gold rallying strongly over the course of 2025. What we have seen in the current conflict is that the safety assets have not performed as expected. We've seen the terms highlighted as nowhere to hide because equities have had a difficult month. They are, as we speak, in March down about 9% overall, an average, but not in every category. We've also seen government bonds have a difficult month to the extent to which the balanced portfolio, so the traditional blend of equities and government bonds, that's traditionally said to be 60-40, that has had its worst month since 2022. Gold itself is down 15% since the beginning of the year. We do not own gold as a pension fund, but it is still important to note that this is not essentially anywhere to hide out. And the only real safety asset, and it's not necessarily because it's safe, but it's because it's what's going up right now, has been energy and oil, etc. So we now see oil in excess of $116 a barrel. So the importance of all of this is certainly there will be a knock-on effect on your portfolio in the short term. But I think we also have to look at the drivers of this particular downturn. It has been a direct relation to the geopolitical uncertainty which has been really cast into markets in the past month. There is a lot of concern. We've seen it from Goldman Sachs. We've seen it from the likes of Christine Lagarde around the impact of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and that markets have not fully processed what's likely to occur. So this uncertainty, as well as the real impact on prices, and there is some saving grace that this is all occurring in the summer months, so there will not be necessarily the same pressure on use of fuel, but clearly the price of fuel is still a major factor in consumer health, that all of this is happening, and this is what's led to the current downturn in markets. So if this is the case, and this is directly related to the geopolitical uncertainty, then you as a long-term investor will need a fairly strong stomach to stay the course, but stay the course you must, because this is likely to reverse as it has done in the case of the Liberation Day tariffs, when we saw a steep downturn followed by a resurgence. So that will be my advice at this stage is, be prepared for a difficult month of March. We're already at the end of the month. It's unlikely to reverse right now. But bearing in mind the diversification we have in place, the underlying strong underpinnings of the economy, which have been proven time and time again. And let's not forget that in the UK, we were already seeing some green shoots before this. We had inflation coming down. It's recently had an uptick again. But we also had the backdrop that it had actually, despite the fact that government bonds have now had increased yields, overall, the recent reception of the budget was quite well received in the end. So we had seen a lot of green shoots around technological investment, etc. So much was going right. And then to shift gears to on the global stage, we know that we saw strong corporate earnings. We saw even the fact that there was unemployment being factored in through AI, that was reflecting again in strong corporate well-being. So this was again the underpinning of the economy. The economy is still strongly tied to tech and the AI story, and that will be messy as it unfolds, because we know now that the focus has shifted to AI's risks and its impact. But overall, the economy has strong underpinnings, but there is a lot depending on the resolution of the current geopolitical conflict. We do know that once it starts to really impact markets, that is likely to be the pain point that President Trump has as a floor in terms of his desire to escalate further. So that's still not really been seen in markets to date. So we are watching that very carefully. And just in terms of really just to take this to an end, there's these comments, but I'm happy to take questions. In terms of the summary, we know that this is really throwing up in the air the inflation predictions. So we know that inflation was otherwise coming down, and with AI advances should continue to come down with deflationary effects of AI and its impact. But that this spike in oil and other supplies such as fertilizer is likely to have a short-term impact. We know that rates were supposed to be coming down, and there is now some hesitation around that. So that could be a real dampener on economic activity. However, we also know that rates cannot in themselves change a supply side inflation effect. So we don't know if that will yet be effective. We do know that we're looking at AI and its effect on business models. We're expecting that to be very rapid as that unfurls. And then the final advice is really this: rebalance and diversify, rinse and repeat. There is really no change to that overall advice. I would simply say that this is the time to really pull the lens back and focus on that long-term investment horizon. And furthermore, just to echo what Betty mentioned about cash flow, we are obviously continuously focused on the cash flow generation potential of this portfolio. And over time, it will be shifting into less equities and more cash flow generators. And these cash flow generators, the essence is that they are contractual cash flow, which will not be dependent on market conditions or on geopolitical conditions. They will be well underwritten sources of cash flow. So that's the direction of travel. And I'd say, clearly a volatile time, and we're watching markets carefully.
Okay, thanks, Ethan. That's fascinating. Lots to process there. Stuart, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Gosh, that was a really, really interesting 10 minutes you gave there. I mentioned earlier on that I felt as though there were pension fund exposure to inflation, and I think, especially when you mentioned the increase in energy costs, I think people are going to realise that the impact that's going to have on everyday costs, food costs, because obviously everything gets shipped around. I'd be also really interested, given that our exposure on the foreign exchange, Forex, in that we've got, I think we've got something like about 60% of our fund is non-sterling. We've got a lot of our fund, I think 40% plus into US dollars. How do you see our exposure to Forex? And do we do anything in the way of, I don't know, I remember when I was in business, we used to buy dollars, I used to hedge it, yes? Is that something we think about, given the volatility we got at the moment?
Thanks for that, Stuart. I'll hand over to Betty.
Stuart, you've asked one of my favourite questions. Usually the answer clears the room. I won't go on for 10 minutes. You've obviously also read the sections of the report that I write, so thank you for that. Currency hedging is a topic that I think is underappreciated by many LGPS funds because you have these multi-currency assets and you've got all your liabilities in one currency. I mean, no one would run a bank that way, right?
Correct.
So there are ways, just sort of becoming, currency traders ourselves, I don't really think is a very smart thing to do within the way, LGPS funds are managed. However, there are now some more flexible ways of managing that, and it's based on, the idea is basically to hedge when you think that sterling might appreciate, but then if you think sterling is going to depreciate, which obviously makes your liabilities cheaper versus assets, you don't want to be hedged. Now, that being said, this past year has been very, very, very difficult, and that's how I put that oscillating sterling-dollar relationship, just to show you how there are no discernible trends that really were able, because it was whipsawed by, events and Donald Trump and things like that. But I think for a long-term investor, and I think this is probably a topic which will be on the long list at the IMCO and the pool. Alex is smiling at me. I think there is something to do that pools could offer these frameworks for doing what we call dynamic currency hedging. So it's not just sort of blindly hedging everything in sterling, but trying to be much more opportunistic. And so having hedge ratios of, say, 0 to 100% and things in between, to when various signals and indicators suggest that there might be a trend of sterling appreciating, because that is a risk. So, yeah, I think that is a topic that should be taken up in due course by the pool and offered for the funds that add this to their own SAA risk management choice.
Oh, well, thank you for that. I just remember in business, I used to buy a lot of print in America, and the volatiles then going back about 15, 20 years ago could literally wipe out all the profits of my business. So hedging to us was really, really important then, hence the reason why I mentioned it.
Couldn't agree more.
And thanks, Stuart, and thanks, Betty. I think Alex and I were conferring when Betty was talking before you said the magic words. This is something the company should look at. I think I agree with you, Stuart, but I think actually looking at both the risk and the exposure, this is something that should definitely reside with the company.
This is also very heavily operational as well, because I've actually worked through this with Bedfordshire recently.
Well, jolly good. Evelyn, would you like to come back in?
Yes, just to come back in on the inflation side and the exposure of the fund to inflation hedging, or inflation resilience really is how we think about it. Hedging gives the sense that it's going to be a direct one-for-one participation. But if you look at the traditional inflation resilient assets in a portfolio, equity comes out at the top. It is not generally going to be a hedge in a shock like we've just had, but it is going to be a progressive steady state protection or resilience around inflation, because equities tend to keep pace with inflation. So as opposed to bonds that would work in the other way, they work in a deflationary environment. So not only does equity have a loose inflation protection, but equally so would real assets. They should have more explicit inflation protection, such as around leases or infrastructure, say toll payments, etc. So we do have that built in. It's not going to be perfect. And when there's an inflation shock like we're seeing, and that has a direct knock-on impact on the consumer's demand pattern, that will affect stock market perception of certain companies. But remember, we're so well diversified that we will have exposure to those companies that consumers trade down into, and not just the discretionary expenditure.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Evelyn. Anybody else have any questions they'd like to raise, or just thoughts generally on current situation? David.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things that I thought took some interest in was the AI, and you mentioned about. It took me a little while to work out that CapEx was capital expenditure, because it's not phraseology I'm used to, and how that seems to be improving profit margin, but leading to loss of staff. That seems to be a trend. Is that, do you think, likely to continue? And then I think the other thing that stood out for me was on page 203, with the power demand rapidly increasing for AI centres, and is that going to have an impact perhaps in some of the investments we should be considering around diversification and use of energy?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And certainly when it comes to AI and the CapEx, this is what's producing some of the doubt or just the hesitation around investors' belief in the bull case, because they're starting to doubt whether it's being spent in the right way. We've seen some big strategic shifts from the likes of Meta, from OpenAI, and cutting back where they basically had large investments, whether it's in the metaverse or in Sora, the video platform. And these large write-offs are just part of the course, it seems, and investors are starting to get a little jittery. So it does seem that this kind of CapEx is necessary to keep pace with demand. That's being justified on that basis. It's also interesting how this has shifted the real estate pattern now around data centers trumping offices in terms of new build, and that again is a new changing shape of the real estate landscape, and why industrials has been so profitable. In terms of energy, this again has been one of the pressure points, and there seems to have been a fairly quick and swift repositioning around energy, certainly in the US, whereby these deep-pocketed tech companies are committing to provide either their own energy, or to committing there will be no increase in energy in the areas where data centers were being built, because this is where they were getting some community pushback, and there was actually some brake on development. So that's the US. I would think that that kind of social concern is going to be front and center in Europe, where energy has always been higher in terms of price, and there's a real, I'd say, very low margin for error around that. Just to back out even further, though, it is the case that energy is one of those adjacent kind of picks and shovels sectors that would sit side by side with technology, alongside the infrastructure for AI, which is seen to be a strong, solid investment where you could invest and take part in the trajectory without being so concentrated in just the tech stocks. And this, again, is definitely something that will flow through from the existing infrastructure investments in the portfolio.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much again for that contribution, Ethan. I'm moving on now because I'm conscious of time and we need to be wrapping up by half 12. So if I could draw members' attention then to the recommendation on page 191 of the report. It is at paragraph 11.1. It's recommended that members note the investment performance that has taken place during Q4 of 2025. Take that as read. Thank you very much, everyone. So item number 13, I think, which is, I've now been reliably informed, is back over to Lewis. So you can, no need to dwell on all the issues in this report, Lewis, as we need to take a decision at the end of it. But item number 13 is the Wales Pension Partnership Update and Business Plan Approval for 26-27.
Thank you, Chair. As always, everyone, feel free to interject with any questions as I present. I will try to present as efficiently as possible in the interest of time. So since the previous meeting of the Pension Committee, the Joint Governance Committee, which acts as the WPP's decision-making body, has met twice. The most recent meeting took place on the 10th of March 2026, and this report draws out kind of the key outcomes from said meeting. Members can access the full minutes and papers via the host authority's website pertaining to the meeting held on March 10th. But we have included a kind of summary of the key outcomes of this meeting within Appendix 1 for completeness. And for your information, that starts on page 239 of your packs. I'll turn next briefly to the operator update in section 5 of the report, which members will have become accustomed to as part of these quarterly updates. So again, at the previous JGC meeting, Waystone, as the WPP operator, provided its latest quarterly update covering current WPP subfund holdings, developments within private market allocations, and a corporate and stewardship activity update. As outlined by section 5.3 of the report, as at the 31st of December 2025, just over 3/4 of the fund's assets are now pooled through the WPP, amounting to just under 3.9 billion. This includes exposures across global, UK and emerging market equities, global fixed income, infrastructure and private credit, with several newer strategies now operational. Members will note in particular the introduction of the new global passive equity solution managed by BlackRock, which represents a significant evolution in aligning the fund's passive exposure with various ESG, climate and stewardship objectives. Detailed fund performance was previously just considered, so I won't draw on returns again here, but the operator update in its entirety can be found within Appendix 2 of this report for your information, which starts on page 243. Now turning to kind of the meat and gravy of this report, which is the WPP Business Plan 2026-2027. So the WPP Business Plan on page 235, which we've denoted within the report as the host authority-led business plan, to provide a clearer distinction between the IMCO business plan, which is a completely separate document that was covered and approved earlier in the agenda. So as in previous years, the host authority has prepared a WPP business plan. However, members should note that the 26-27 plan is deliberately different in nature. So given the establishment of the investment management company, the intention is for this document to be treated as a transitionary plan, covering a shorter annual time frame as opposed to the 3-year period, and it's intended to have a much more focused remit. The emphasis of the host authority-led plan is no longer on delivering investment solutions, but on providing collective oversight of the new investment management company, supporting partner fund engagement under the revised governance framework that's been established or in the process of being established, discharging formal responsibilities in respect of IMCO such as reserves matters and budget approvals, considering potential local investment opportunities across Wales. This is something that will predominantly be implemented by the new investment management company, but CAs are likely to have a kind of a steer in terms of eventual opportunities that are considered. And the last kind of objective is to specify a common responsible investment policy across each of the partner funds. An important point to note here is the Associated Host Authority Business Plan budget has been significantly reduced to reflect a narrower scope of services provided, with the majority of costs now sitting within the IMCO structure. I would also like to mention that the Host Authority Business Plan has already been approved by the Joint Governance Committee on March the 10th and its last meeting. And under the Inter-Authority Agreement, or the IAA, this document now requires approval from each constituent authority, including the Pension Committee. I didn't plan on taking members through the Host Authority Business Plan on a page-by-page basis, but the full document is available within Appendix 3 to this report, or page 259 of your packs for perusal. Given that it's quite a substantive item that requires recommendation, I'll pause there briefly to allow for any questions on the Host Authority-led business plan.
Okay, Betty's got a hand up. I know I said to do a canter through it. It might be worthwhile, as you said, it is a substantial issue, that you should point out the main points of the business plan as a rule, but we'll move on as we are, and I might ask Alex to come in if he has any thoughts on the business planning process. Betty.
Yeah, I was just drawn to the bottom of page 235 and what the Host Authority or Marvinger is going to do. And it's the fourth bullet: exercise effective collective oversight of the IMCO service delivery to clients, including investment performance, investment costs, effective implementation services, quality of advice, and effective implementation of partner fund RI policies. Do we think that they are sufficiently qualified and really able to do this? How is this going to happen in real life?
That's probably one for Alex to respond to. Thanks.
Thanks, Betty. I think it's a good observation. I suppose this is a more general comment on the business plan from a WPP client side, which is what we have here. I would read this in conjunction with the transitional plan of the new company business plan. I think there is room to see how this develops over the year ahead. The reality is, and has always been, that Carmarthenshire as host don't have the resource or the expertise to deliver this on behalf of everybody, and have relied on external advice in which to do that. That external advice will still exist, and I think it's to be seen how best to utilise it, given that the new company should be coming forward with, obviously, the implementation side of things. So I suspect that this may look a lot different in 12 months' time, and I think at this stage the view was there should still be a business plan and budget assigned for the clients to utilise as they see fit, particularly as this is a transition. But it's probably one that, alongside it, and I know locally we're talking about this, is to think about how we use our own external advisors to support that, because whilst I think there are collective objectives that we would try to oversee the new company on an all-eight basis, there will also be individual need and preference. So, as I say, I think for this year it makes sense to have a one-year transitional arrangement that is aligned to the company, but probably in 12 months' time we should be having a conversation about what the new iteration looks like.
I'll just ask, does it seem to make sense to use presumably the same external advisor, Hymans, who's been so integral to setting up a lot of this stuff? I mean, isn't that grading their own homework?
I'll jump in there, give him greater cover as he's going off. That's a very valid point to raise. I think in general, for members of this at the JGC, the WPP, we did put in caveat. We have put in some verbal caveats this time round, because I think there were questions raised about why the budget needed to be so great in this going forward as the companies have been set up. So we have been satisfied by officers' explanations about the need to have that budget set out for this transitionary process, but quite frankly, I raised explicitly in the meeting that this needs to be reviewed almost from the get-go. So I think for other reasons, we don't need to detain you here. As we've been going through the inter-authority agreement process, one of the other funds was less happy with the state of affairs when it initially went through their committee. That was Clwyd. I think Clwyd initially rejected the inter-authority agreement. They've now met again, and because of some of the issues that the chairs have pushed for, they're now happy to have voted it through. They voted it through last week. One of the issues we've raised is there needs to be a continuous review of processes from day one. So I think initially, in the inter-authority agreement, there was a suggestion that at the 12 or 18-month period, we start a review process. We've said that's not good enough. It needs to be reviewed from day one, so we are in a position by the summer of next year to take a view on how to take these things forward. I think we've also been quite clear with the host authority that, quite frankly, the host authority activity in 12 or 18 months' time, at least, will not look like what it currently looks like because of the evolution of the company. And we definitely foresee a very different role for the host authority going forward, and indeed whether the host authority exists in any meaningful sense by the end of, I think, the next term after the elections in 2027 is something we should be very much alive to. I have views on that, but I wouldn't want to prejudice them by saying them in a public forum this morning. Any other questions on what Alex, what Lewis has already set out in his report? David?
No, I think it's logical, and I think the focus on sort of risk governance arrangements, etc., makes a lot of sense because obviously the operational management of funds changes. I think it's sensible to have this sort of thing here. These are, as the chair has alluded to, these are in some respects the need to make sure everybody's trousers are nailed to the mast to go forward. So in that way, I think it makes sense to endorse this, to go forward, recognising that it's going to look very different in 12 months' time.
Absolutely. Before I bring Lewis back in to finish off, I mean, Alex, do you have any last reflections on the WPP? That sounds good. Tell us everything you think about the world and everything that's going on. I didn't mean that, but any reflections you've got on the business plan before heading back to Lewis?
No, I don't think so. I think, given what we have, it's significantly paid back, recognising the new company's role. I think it is appropriate to have a plan of sorts to oversee the new company for the next 12 months, but I recognise that needs to be nimble and it will probably not look the same in 12 months' time.
Yeah, and agree, just to underline again, I think there is recognition and interest from the chairs to ensure that that is also a politically led process. I think Carmarthen should have done a very good job over the last 10 years getting us to where we are, but it shouldn't be for the host authority to be setting out the parameters for its continued existence alongside the same tram lines that it's been working. I think there is definitely a consensus amongst the current crop of chairs that we want to be a bit more involved in shaping out that future. So, one other thing I just want to point out to you, because I know we mentioned it earlier on, is just to draw people's attention to item number 8 on the exclusions policy, which does talk through in a bit more detail. And just to say again that if not this side of Easter, definitely when we're back next week, Lewis and I will work on this and the other materials we've got that we are waiting to hear back from Hymans, and then be in communication with the board and then others, the committee rather, and the board, and then others about our response to the various positions and motions. So, Lewis, over to you just to finish off.
Thank you, Chair. The last area I wanted to cover relates to what you just talked about. I think you've covered the kind of premise, but I just wanted to add a little bit of context to that. So, part of the work undertaken as part of the exercise to determine the WPP exclusions policy included a review of all underlying WPP holdings to assess exposures to various areas of risk, some quantitative analysis, scenario testing and issuer-level insights from some of the WPP's third-party providers, and the formation of a dedicated exclusions working group which included LGBS officer and elected member representation from the fund, with the sole purpose of progressing this work stream forward in a timely manner. I did want to reiterate kind of the main areas or the main kind of subject matters whereby companies would be excluded again. I think that's quite clear in the cover report. I guess I just wanted to touch on kind of that the updated WPP responsible investment policy includes this newly established stance and a copy of the responsible investment policy is available within Appendix 4, where green text denotes changes to some of the pre-existing wording, and the RI policy can be found on pages 274 and 275 of your packs. And I think that's everything I wanted to cover. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Lewis, for that. In which case, I'd like to draw members' attention to the recommendations on paragraph 10 on page 238. At 10.1, it is recommended that the Pension Committee notes the content of this report as well as the respective appendices and raise any questions as appropriate, and 2, approve the 26-27 WPP business plan. Members happy with that? Yeah, great, fantastic, thank you very much. Item 14 on page 281, and back to Joanne, this is the training update.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be familiar with this report. This report sets out the training log for 25-26 and also the annual training plan, which we will be revisiting and providing members with an update in the new year. I just also wanted to mention about Hymans Robinson's LGPS Online Learning Academy. I know many of you have accessed this and you all have access to the platform. It is shortly going to be upgraded to provide a more blended LGPS learning plan, which includes shorter videos, on-demand content, written material and interactive quiz elements. So it's basically designed to support a number of different learning styles. So we're expecting this platform to be available in the next couple of months, and I'll provide more information at that time. But I'd just like to encourage members to use the new platform when it becomes available, because it's a very important part of members' continuous learning, especially in light of the Fit for the Future consultation. Thank you.
Short and sweet. Thank you, Joanne. And just to underline that final point, that once the recommendations of Fit for the Future come on stream after April, I think MHCLG will be much more interested in the ongoing education and training for members of the committee. So maybe actually, Joanne, it's something, once we start meeting after Easter, we can sit down. Because quite frankly, I think there is some merit actually in returning to think about actually what training we put on as a committee in real life to supplement the online work. Because I know now that Lola is up and running, I've been told at least it's a very good platform. I haven't logged on yet, I admit. But again, as we've discussed in previous meetings, I know that Councillors Horler and Williams agree, sometimes 2.5 hours of training by PowerPoint online is not necessarily the easiest way to get the information through your skull. So I think it might make sense if we start thinking about what an in real life supplement to that training might look like as we move forward. Which, as people have laughed around the table, I think I'll take that as agreement. Right, recommendation though is at paragraph 4 at 4.1 on page 281. So it's recommended that the Pension Committee notes the annual training programme included in Appendix 2 and consider whether any specific training areas or topics should be included. We've agreed that, basically. I think everyone happy with that? Excellent, fantastic. Moving on then, item number 15 is the date of the next meeting, which applies for most of us. That is the 15th of June 2026. So if you can put that into your diaries, everyone, that would be fantastic. Lastly, though, I've been debating whether we do this with the cameras on or off. If anybody wants to embarrass Alex, I think leave them running. Jade, I just wanted to, basically, I'm going to give Alex an opportunity to say some words if he wishes. Actually, there's no wish about it. I'm going to encourage Alex to say a couple of words. But I just wanted to sort of mark the occasion as it is Alex's last committee meeting as head of pensions, and obviously it's his last day with the authority tomorrow after 6 years, is just to say, as a personal reflection, just to say thank you very much for your support over the past 4 years. As we sort of semi-joke at this committee from time to time, it's an awful lot of information. It's not what I don't think anybody, any elected member on this committee was elected because they wanted to sit on a pension committee. Indeed, I've now met some councillors from the South East, on Surrey and on Kent, who seemingly did stand for election last year because they were quite keen to get their hands on the pension committee, but that's a different, potentially political conversation we don't need to have today. But I just want to say that, bearing in mind you've had a number of... John was the only member with continuous service on this committee in the previous term. But I think we all acknowledge the work you've done in sort of helping us through and improving our understanding of the work of the committee and of the endless patience you've demonstrated with members over that period. I think definitely, like I said, for me personally, coming in as chair with next to zero knowledge of the area, I think, quite frankly, you've been an absolute godsend. It's been one of the nicest things, I think, being elected in the last 4 years is the development of our relationship, our working relationship, and quite frankly, how well I think we've worked together. I'm not taking credit. The pair of us are taking credit for all the advances of the last couple of years. But I do think if you start thinking about the shift we've made in emphasis of our investment strategy, about thinking about impact, thinking about responsible investment, for taking some decisions early doors, where quite frankly I think we were ahead of the curve in terms of some of the impulses coming out of both this and the previous government in terms of local investments and productive assets. I think we've worked quite well, and I think it is a huge credit to your work as head of pensions in those last 4 years that we have breached that 5 billion mark, and that also that the WP Investments Company is ready to actually launch on April is in no small part, I think, to your dedication to the hard work that you've put into this over the last couple of years. So that's it from me, because I don't want to say anything too encouraging on camera. Any other members or anybody else, or Ian or either advisors wish to say something, you're more than welcome to. You don't have to, but I'll take Andrew first.
Thank you, Chair. And I echo your comments about Alex. He's done a fantastic job. I've only been here, nearly just under 2 years. But it's very clear when I arrived that the pensions were well managed and well understood, and the organisation knew exactly what it was doing. And you picked up as chair, we've helped train you to understand some of those quite difficult, tricky things that LDPS brings. It's things you don't normally experience in the real world. And Alex has sort of managed that process with the team, and it's been fantastic. And we are a long-term investment. It's a long-term project. We're all transient in this nature because we've got a 70-plus year relationship with a lot of our members, and there's nearly 70,000 members out there. So on behalf of the 70,000 members, it's a thank you, Alex, because you're handing the baton on, I think, in a better position when you received it. And that's all we can ask in these arrangements, that's all we can do, and that's to your credit. We've done that. And I'm also conscious, in fact, you've had 2 jobs for the last 9 months, because you've been looking after as head of pensions, but I also know that your role in the secondment with the setting up the investment company was in effect a full-time job, and that's very much appreciated by myself and Rob and all the others. So a rather big thank you, and thank you very much for handing on. And we know where you are, so we will keep in touch.
Well, we know who to blame as well. Although we don't live in a blame culture. This is a lovely, collaborative, collective approach to the well-being of the Welsh pensions environment, and you will be pivotal to any communication flowing in that direction. I'll take Ian in the room.
Well, I wasn't expecting to say anything today, because I was expecting to have another chance to embarrass Alex in a month's time, but if that's not going to happen, I just want to reiterate really what Nathan said. I think Alex has done a fantastic job. I'm really grateful for the support he's given me personally as chair of the board, and for the support and advice that he's provided to the board over the time he's been here. He leaves this pension fund in a far better state, a far stronger state than he inherited it, and he leaves some excellent staff behind who can carry on the good work. I think he'll be an excellent asset for WPP. Clearly a great loss to us, but I can understand why Alex wants to move on. I think the opportunity that WPP provides is a great opportunity not to be missed. So thank you for all your support, and we'll keep in touch.
Excellent. And I think Ethan wants to say a couple of words, but then I will limit it. So I know you've got your hand up, Bob, but apologies. Okay. I'll take Ethan, then David. Then
yeah, I actually, that wasn't... Well, I'm sorry, but that may have been an error. I was not going to say words at this point.
And I actually meant to say Betty, not Ethan. So maybe I should have closed this down so it wasn't on public records. I'll look like a twit when this goes up on YouTube. I am the only person that watches it though, so that's fine. I'll take Betty, then David, then quickly Bob, then over to Alex.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I echo everything's been said thus far. But I do remember the first time I met you when you had just been hired. I think it was December 2019 or something like that, and you just showed up. And it's been just such a pleasure to work with you, and you just are so nimble, and you get things so quickly, and you're just such a great team player. So it's very gratifying for somebody like me. Anyway, I was just really enjoyed working with you. You've built a great team, and if we had to lose you, I think the best place is for you to be down the street. We still get to work with you, and good luck.
Cheers. Thank you. I think a lot's been said, so I won't repeat it. I just have to say that I found you to be extremely professional and helpful at a personal level. You've made it clear that no question is a stupid question, and you've always treated them and responded to them with the utmost professionalism, and that's extremely appreciated. Thank you very much.
So, Bob, last word is with you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. And yeah, Alex, thank you very much for your, as a board member, for your knowledge, cooperation and your courtesy. Thank you.
I just want to say, as a bit of a corrective before I hand over to Alex, he can also be a pain in the arse.
And on that note, well, thanks to everybody. Thanks very much. I appreciate all those comments, and I too feel very much the same. A strange time for me in some ways. Obviously, 6 years with Torfaen. I've said in a few circles already, I wouldn't necessarily have looked for another role had it not been the one I'm taking, because I really do enjoy working with the authority, and the fact that I've got largely those around the table have been here since I joined, and for those who haven't, it's been a number of years, so I'm really pleased with that. I think, I suppose reflections, when I came in and I sort of took the role on from my predecessor, the very first quarter I presented a £455 million loss that the fund had experienced through that initial part of COVID, and I guess at that point I just had to keep smiling, and things could only improve, and I hope that was the case. And clearly, with the fund nearly doubling since, things have moved on. So things have got better, a lot better, and I think learned a lot on the way. Very grateful to everybody around the table, not least Mr. Yole, very supportive and give lots of direction as chair of the committee, as of all committee members, Andrew and Nigel before him, but also to our advisors, Betty and Ethan, who have been here and with me since I joined, and also with Joe and Lewis in particular, with the way that the fund is developing. I'm leaving it in really good hands, and I know that things will work well. And as I said, I'm not going far away. I expect to be sat in this forum at some point in the future, I'm sure, and will enjoy that opportunity to talk about all the things the company are doing, and I don't undermine that or overlook that responsibility at all. So I'd just like to say thanks very much for everybody's well wishes, and I won't be a stranger. Thank you.
And with that threat, I think we can definitely bring the... with that, we can bring the curtains down on the, this committee meeting today. So it is the last meeting of the current municipal cycle. So thank you all the members here today and those who can't be present, because you never know, there might be a change in membership. It's just important to recognise everyone's commitment and involvement with the committee over the last 12 months. So I think with that, Jade, long overdue, we can bring this meeting to a close. Thank you very much, everyone.